The Empire's perfect, holy prince suddenly lunged forward like a starving beast, his eyes completely consumed by a forbidden demon of lust. Pinned beneath his crushing grip, Levi realized that her second life was about to end before it even truly began. In her past life, she was a nameless slave who worked herself into an early grave, only to wake up as a fragile, doomed extra in a dark romance novel, destined to watch her entire family get brutally slaughtered. But she refused to die twice. Armed with future knowledge, she secretly purged the traitors from her house and claimed a forbidden divine power for herself. Her master plan to rewrite the plot was flawless, until she discovered that the novel's final villain wasn't a heartless monster, but a desperate man hiding a terrifying, dark desire. To stop a bloody rebellion, must she uncover the prince's deadliest secrets, or will his darkness consume her first? The battle for survival begins right now. The wind whistled through the air above a grand, sprawling estate, carrying with it a sense of sudden dread. In an instant, the peaceful atmosphere shattered as a frantic voice cried out that demons had appeared. Malignant, serpentine creatures slithered across the gardens, their grotesque forms casting dark shadows over the elegant grounds. Amidst the chaos, a youth with messy pink hair drew his sword, his cape fluttering behind him. He commanded those around him to stay calm and take the monsters down. Beads of sweat rolled down his face as he grit his teeth, wondering what on earth had happened at the picnic to cause such a disaster. He stared at the majestic mansion, questioning why these demons had suddenly shown up out of nowhere as a low, ominous rumble vibrated through the air. In a quiet, dimly lit room, the scene shifted to an intimate and heated moment. A soft kiss was shared between two figures, their breaths hitching in the heavy air. The man pressed close, his dark hair falling over his eyes as a faint moan escaped the blonde woman beneath him. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with a mix of recognition and desire, whispering the name Levi Heron. He looked back at her with a feverish intensity, addressing her as His Highness while their heavy breathing filled the silence. The man was Damien Evelyn, a figure known throughout the Empire as someone who avoided scandals and maintained strict abstinence. He was a man with everything to lose, especially since nothing was supposed to get in the way of him becoming the crown prince. However, in this moment, his mind was no longer his own, being completely controlled by a demon of lust. He moved with a predatory grace, intent on making the woman his very first prey. She felt a sharp pang of regret, thinking that if she had only crushed that demon when she encountered it earlier, it never would have been able to take over this man's body. As his hand gripped the fabric of his shirt, she realized that if things went any further, there would be no turning back. Damien let out a frustrated curse, his body springing forward as he began to strip away his clothes. She was visibly startled, her heart racing as she watched him. She knew she shouldn't do this, yet she found herself wondering if there was actually a reason why she shouldn't. After all, she realized that Damien would not remember anything that happened while the demon was controlling his body. She possessed the power of the blessing, and a thought crossed her mind that if Damien satisfied his desires with her, his demonic energy might actually be purified. Their hands clasped together firmly as they moved closer. Looking back, she reflected that she never once thought she would get involved with Damien Evelyn in such a way. This was the story of a villain consumed by desire. Before she had overworked herself to death in her previous life, she had spent her final moments reading a dark romance novel called The Saintess Awakens in prison. It was a story where the author had failed to tie up all the loose ends, eventually abandoning the work and leaving the readers with a serious train wreck of a plot. She had woken up inside that very novel, arriving a little before the main story was set to move. It was a time when the battle for the position of crown prince was at its fiercest, and interestingly, there wasn't a single hint of romance to be found in the original text. There were two princes in the Empire. The first prince was the novel's final villain and an obsessive sub-male lead named Damien Evelyn. He was the one who had imprisoned the female lead and used her as if she were nothing more than a divine power battery. To the public, he acted like a perfect and benevolent ruler, but in reality, his personality and character were deeply flawed. His half-brother, Fried Evelyn, served as the story's protagonist and the second prince. When Fried eventually won the succession battle and became the emperor's successor, Damien could not accept his defeat and started a bloody rebellion. She had woken up in the body of a character who tried to suppress that rebellion, only to die and have her entire family killed off alongside her. She was now the only daughter of House Heron, a prestigious family of knights. Her name was Levi Heron, though she was cruelly nicknamed Heron's defect. She let out a weary sigh, wondering why she had to wake up in the body of a minor character destined for such a futile death. The thought of being a throwaway character from a family of knights weighed heavily on her. Embarrassing memories flooded her mind, making her cringe as she recalled how the original Levi had failed to seduce the male lead and headed straight for an early grave. A maid nearby let out a sharp cry of alarm, startled by her mistress's sudden distress. Levi thought about her circumstances, noting that even if she had received the blessing from the first Count Heron and could use the power of the Divine Lion, it didn't change her past. The original Levi was born frail and grew up spoiled, with the only thing she ever took an interest in being Prince Fried. Because of that obsession, it had been impossible for her to rally the knights and stop the rebellion. In her past life, she had grown up in an orphanage without a family or anyone important to her. She had barely managed to get into college and had to work several part-time jobs just to pay off her student loans. The constant grind left her perpetually dizzy until, in the end, she collapsed from overwork and died. Now, faced with a second chance, she was indignant that she was being told she had to die early all over again. She resolved that she would not let that happen. Fortunately, the rebellion was scheduled to happen 3 years from now, which meant she still had enough time to change the course of the original story. She turned away, stepping through her room with newfound purpose. She decided that she needed to train her weak body, as right now, she couldn't even swing a sword properly. She also planned to avoid interacting with the male leads as much as possible, especially the final villain, Damien Evelyn. She told herself she should steer clear of him no matter what. A sudden knock at the door broke her concentration. A man's voice called out, identifying himself as her uncle. She realized it was Uncle Aaron and stood by the window as he mentioned hearing that she was feeling a lot better. He stepped into the room, suggesting that if she felt up for it, they should have a nice family dinner together. This man was Aaron Heron, Levi's uncle. Since Levi's mother had passed away years ago and her father was traveling far from home, she had been left all alone. It was understandable why the original Levi had accepted her uncle's company, as he must have seemed like the only ray of light in her lonely life. But she knew the truth. She looked at him with a sharp, discerning gaze, knowing that Uncle Aaron was actually the villain who would plunge House Heron into a serious financial crisis. If she wanted to stop the rebellion, she needed the power of her house, and she couldn't let a man like that destroy the family. The door creaked as she made her decision. She knew exactly what needed to be fixed first and foremost. With a firm clack of her shoes against the floor, she walked forward into the garden. Surrounded by blooming flowers, she declared to herself that she would change House Heron's future. The morning sun filtered through the ornate curtains of the dining hall as Aaron Heron gestured for Levi to come and sit. Taking her place at the long table, she offered a polite thanks, noting that the food looked delicious. Her uncle watched her with a practiced smile, assuring her that he was certain it would be to her taste. He leaned back, observing her closely and remarking that she had been sick quite often since she was a little girl. He explained that the chefs had put a tremendous amount of effort into this specific dish, as they believed she needed to eat well to finally recover her health. Levi looked down at her plate, simply asking if that was really the case. Aaron continued, his voice dripping with forced sincerity as he mentioned that even so, he thought something a bit more flavorful would have been appropriate for today, adding that he wished the kitchen would listen to his opinion every once in a while. Levi's fork halted just inches from her mouth. Behind her calm facade, she realized what a cunning thing he was doing, knowing full well that the servants would have no choice but to cater to his every whim if she, as the acting head of the family, ordered them to do so. It was a manipulative tactic that might have worked if she were still the same pampered, naive girl she used to be, but she steeled herself, knowing she would not fall for his games so easily. She set her fork down with a sharp clack and met his gaze with a bright, innocent smile, suggesting that the staff must have prepared the meal this way because they knew how picky she was with her food. She tilted her head slightly, telling him that she hoped he understood her position. Aaron's smile twitched as he let out a confused sound, eventually stammering out that it was all right. Levi watched him, recalling that in the original story, Uncle Aaron had been kicked out of the family home due to his long string of failed business ventures and scandalous affairs with multiple women. She felt a surge of irritation, thinking that a man like him should never have been allowed to set foot on this estate again. However, the original Levi had let him stay, and on the tragic day of the rebellion, he had shamelessly claimed that he was also a Heron and had every right to lead the family. Using that as a pathetic excuse, he had taken all of the family's knights and fled from the rebellion, leaving everyone behind to suffer. She looked at her uncle, knowing she had to prevent that timeline from happening if she wanted to change her fate in this world. She remembered a specific passage from the novel stating that Levi wasn't even aware her uncle had been embezzling her family's assets and donations, which made stopping Damien's rebellion an impossible task from the very beginning. She decided then and there that she would use the knowledge she had from the novel to finally get rid of Uncle Aaron. She stabbed a piece of food on her plate with a decisive movement, her eyes hardening with resolve. A few days later, the midday sun shone over the massive estate. As Levi walked through the corridors, a loyal servant followed closely behind, asking with a hushed tone if it was really true that Lord Aaron had been embezzling the family's assets. She confirmed it with a sharp nod, stepping forward with purpose. She noted that since her uncle was currently out at a social gathering, this was their perfect chance to look for the evidence they needed. Stopping before a set of heavy, ornate doors, she commanded the men to open them for her. They obeyed immediately, and with a series of loud bangs, the locks were forced open. As they entered, she noticed that the room was surprisingly sparse. She pointed toward the center of the floor and asked the servant to lift up the carpet. As he reached down and pulled the heavy fabric back, he gasped in surprise, realizing that it was a hidden door to the secret passage within the estate. Levi looked down at the wooden hatch, explaining that her great-grandfather had originally sealed it off to keep any potential assassins from getting inside. However, it was now clear that her uncle had been using the remaining stairway as a private storage space. She stood over the opening and gave a firm order to move everything found inside to her office. Just as they began their work, a frantic voice cut through the air, demanding to know the meaning of what was happening. Levi turned her head slightly, seeing her uncle standing in the doorway, huffing and puffing as if he had run the entire way back. She remarked coolly that he was back quite early. Aaron let out a furious shout, asking her what on earth she thought she was doing. But as he looked into her eyes, a sudden, freezing chill washed over him. He was struck by a terrifying feeling, realizing that Levi was looking at him with cold, bloodthirsty eyes. She stepped toward him, addressing him calmly as Uncle Aaron. She told him directly that she had discovered he was embezzling the items that were donated in the name of House Heron. Aaron's face paled, and he faltered, asking what she was talking about and if she was actually accusing him of stealing. Levi didn't blink, stating that she knew for a fact he was guilty. As she spoke, the elderly butler, Varan, stepped forward, carrying a small, ornate wooden box. Levi looked at her uncle and told him that now that she had seen the physical evidence, his guilt was undeniable. Aaron lunged forward and grabbed the box, but it slipped from his fingers, causing the contents to tumble across the floor. A collection of brilliant, expensive jewels spilled out with a series of sharp clacks. Levi reached down and grabbed one of the gems, explaining that he had hidden the more expensive donations in the underground stairway. She pointed out that he would have been caught right away if the items were simply missing, so he had sent much cheaper, lower-quality items to the recipients instead. She revealed that she had already talked to those recipients and confirmed that the items the family sent were not the ones they actually received. She looked at him with pity, telling him that since he had been doing this for years, he would likely be in prison for a very long time. Aaron grit his teeth, his face contorted with rage as he wondered if she had known where he was hiding the items all along. He felt humiliated, realizing she had been acting innocent this whole time while making a complete fool out of him. With a desperate growl, he lifted his hand to strike her, calling her a defect and asking how she dared to deceive him. But before his hand could connect, Levi raised her palm. A powerful whir of magical energy surged through the air, and Aaron was violently thrown back, landing on the floor with a heavy plop. Levi stood over him, telling him firmly that he could not hit her. She explained that any Heron who didn't inherit the blessing had no choice but to submit to the power of one who did. She recalled the history of her house, noting that the first Count Heron was a divine white lion who used a special power called the Blessing to help the Emperor drive out the demons. Only a Heron who inherited that specific power could take over the family title. She looked down at her trembling uncle, admitting that she might be a defective Heron in some eyes, but unlike him, she was born with the blessing. Aaron quivered in fear as she leaned closer, warning him not to even think about trying to defeat her. The sheer pressure of her presence was too much, and Aaron fainted, his body collapsing with a soft thud. Levi let out a breath, noting that he had fainted, and ordered the servants to get him out of her sight. As she stood in the quiet room, she realized it was just as she had thought. She couldn't use the blessing properly because her current body was far too weak. Varan rushed to her side, his face filled with concern as he asked if she was all right. She looked at the old man, addressing him as Varan, and he admitted that truth be told, the staff had also found Lord Aaron suspicious for a long time. He explained that they simply couldn't bring themselves to tell her because they knew how lonely she was and feared she would be hurt if they sent him away. However, he looked at her with newfound respect, telling her she had made the right decision as the acting head of the family. The elderly butler became teary-eyed, promising that he would make sure to report everything that happened today to her father. He choked back a sob, saying her father would be so proud to see how much she had grown. Levi could only offer a confused sound in response to his sudden emotional outburst. Varan turned to another servant, commanding him to start writing a daily report of her achievements starting today. Levi watched them, wondering if these people wanted to create something as detailed as the ancient annals of a dynasty. Still, she felt a small smile tug at her lips, feeling grateful that despite the original Levi's past, the servants still believed in her and were willing to help. She thanked them for watching over her and protecting her all this time, and for helping her finally send Aaron away. She gave them a bright, genuine smile, promising that from now on, she would do her best as the acting head and try not to make them worry. The servants were visibly touched by her words. Feeling a little embarrassed by the attention, she announced that she would head to her office now. But Varan stopped her, holding up a document and telling her they had found one more thing in Lord Aaron's storage. Levi took the paper, noticing it was an application for the academy written in Uncle Aaron's handwriting. She realized that he had been trying to enroll her in secret and have her stay at a villa near the academy under the guise of shortening her commute. He was clearly trying to send her away from House Heron so he could take over the family. She considered the situation, realizing that although his own schemes had come back to bite him, this actually worked out for the best. She had to attend the academy eventually anyway, so she figured she might as well enroll right away. A few days later, a grand carriage pulled up to the gates of the prestigious academy. As the door opened, a servant announced that they had arrived. Levi stepped out, reflecting on how she had thought things would go at the time. But the moment she arrived at the academy, she froze. A man was walking nearby, his dark hair messy and his hand pressed to his forehead as if he were in pain. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him immediately. She stared in disbelief, wondering why on earth the final villain, Damien Evelyn, was already here. The academy stood as a grand testament to the first emperor's vision, an institution founded on the belief that all nobles should be educated and cultured. It served as a mandatory rite of passage for every noble in the empire once they came of age, and as such, all the primary characters from the novel were destined to enroll within its walls. Levi felt a cold wave of realization wash over her as she stared at the man standing just a few feet away. She had not expected to run into the final villain the very moment she arrived. Damien Evelyn looked weary, his dark hair falling over his eyes as he pressed a hand to his forehead as if nursing a persistent headache. His gaze shifted to her, and he asked with a low, sharp tone if she was the lady of House Heron. Levi was visibly startled, her eyes wide as she quickly bowed and offered her sincere apologies for not greeting him sooner. Damien let out a soft, mocking sound, suggesting that her hesitation likely stemmed from the fact that he was not the second prince she had been hoping to see. Levi felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, realizing that Damien was well aware of her history. He knew everything that had happened at the royal ball, and the memory of the original Levi's desperate behavior was agonizingly embarrassing. She knew he was likely wary of her because he believed she was still deeply in love with his rival, Fried. She realized that if she didn't say something to change his perception of her, he might very well end up killing her during the rebellion again. Searching for a way to break the heavy silence, she let out a series of small, forced coughs. She looked down at her hands, admitting that she had been so excited about finally enrolling in the academy that she had failed to pay proper attention to her surroundings. Damien repeated her words with a hint of skepticism, questioning the part about finally enrolling. Levi explained that she had been forced to delay her enrollment by an entire year due to her recurring health issues. She paused for a moment, then added that while it might sound silly, she remembered a lakeside picnic from their childhood. Damien had invited her and several other young nobles, and she told him that the sketch drawn that day was still kept safely at her estate. She looked up at him, noting that perhaps because she had looked at that drawing for so long, she hadn't recognized him immediately since he had grown so much. In the original novel, the very first thing Damien had done after the success of his rebellion was go looking for that specific sketch. It had been his very last precious memory of time spent with the Empress, his mother. Levi hoped that by evoking those buried emotions and reminding him of a gentler time, he might find a reason to spare her when he eventually became a traitor in the future. Damien let out a sudden, genuine chuckle, expressing disbelief that she would bring up something that had happened such a long time ago. He stepped closer, his presence looming over her as he remarked that she certainly had a knack for talking herself out of trouble. He questioned if her memories of that time were actually hazy, or if she was just being clever. He then admitted that he hadn't actually planned to punish a lady obsessed with Fried simply because she failed to greet him immediately. Levi quickly pivoted, making another excuse that she had only fainted that day because the large crowds had made her feel claustrophobic. Damien began to walk away, his steady footsteps echoing on the stone path. He told her she didn't need to make excuses and addressed her by her full name, Levi Heron. He looked back over his shoulder, stating that he would keep in mind that she had enrolled as a freshman this year. Later that day, the entrance ceremony began with a solemn prayer service. Within the hallowed halls of the Academy Chapel, students bowed their heads as a voice called for the goddess to bless the new arrivals and grant them peace. Levi watched Damien from across the room as he stood with his hands clasped in prayer. She was struck by how well he kept up appearances, wondering if this was truly the same irritable man she had encountered earlier. As the service concluded, a priest from the great temple approached the prince. The man's expression was frosty despite his polite words, as he mentioned he had been worried when he heard Prince Fried could not make it to the ceremony. He expressed a cold gratitude that Damien had seen fit to take his brother's place. Damien met the priest's gaze with a sharp grin, replying that thanks to the opportunity, he had been able to feel the goddess's grace himself. He added that if anything, he should be the one thanking the priest. The priest's demeanor remained icy as he noted how devout the prince seemed, offering a hollow wish that the goddess would bless him soon. Damien leaned in slightly, his voice dropping as he told the priest that he needn't worry about him. He suggested that the priest should instead focus his efforts on looking after Fried, who was currently occupied with his demanding work as the captain of the paladins. As the crowd began to chatter and disperse, Levi observed the exchange from a distance. She noted that Damien's attitude in public was completely different from his private persona. It was chilling to think that such a well-mannered man was destined to lust after the female lead and perform explicit acts with her for hundreds of pages in the original story. She let out a weary sigh, wondering how she was supposed to get along with such a two-faced individual. She resolved that her best course of action was to maintain an appropriate distance from Damien at all costs. Back in his private quarters, Damien stripped off his formal jacket and tossed it onto the bed. He sat down with a heavy thud, thinking to himself that the old priest was as sly as a fox. A firm knock sounded at the door, and his bodyguard, Douglas, announced his arrival with some cool tea. Damien told him to come in, and the red-haired man entered the room, asking if the high priest had managed to get under the prince's skin again. Damien let out a frustrated sound, admitting that he would much rather the man insult him openly like he used to. He recalled the priest's biting words from the past, reminding him that he had been born on the day of a demon outbreak without any divine power of his own. The priest had once mocked him, saying he wasn't sure if his prayers would ever reach the goddess. Damien agreed that at least he could get angry when he was openly disrespected. He set his teacup down with a sharp clack, noting that the people at the temple weren't completely foolish. They knew he was a strong candidate for the crown prince, so they were likely only behaving themselves now because of the power he had managed to gain. He lifted his tea again, intending to drink it quickly so he wouldn't waste the effort put into its preparation. He looked at Douglas, telling him he appreciated the consideration, but his previous master had always stressed the vital importance of consistency. As he sipped the tea, his thoughts drifted to his mother. She had been exceptionally beautiful and possessed a strong divine power. Despite starting her life as the wife of a lowly provincial baron, she had risen to become the empress of the nation. However, her life of luxury had shattered when the emperor suddenly fell ill. The temple had seized the opportunity, claiming his illness was a direct result of the empress's supposed impurity. They had declared that the emperor would only recover if he took a new wife, leading him to marry Zelda Roaz, the daughter of Duke Roaz, who held a very close relationship with the temple. Once Zelda became the new consort, she had attacked and slandered Damien's mother relentlessly. As a result, the only people who remained loyal to his mother were Douglas, who had followed her from the baron's estate to the capital, and Damien himself. He remembered standing before her grave, vowing that he would not die a pathetic death like she had. He realized that the power he currently possessed simply wasn't enough. He knew he had to become the perfect emperor in order to survive, otherwise, the temple and their faction would find a way to drive him to his death as well. Douglas broke his train of thought, announcing that he would return soon to escort the prince to the entrance banquet. As the door shut, Damien leaned back, thinking about the upcoming event. He supposed he would be seeing the lady of House Heron there, noting it had been quite a while since he had seen her in high society. He recalled her reputation for being perpetually ill and was surprised by how lively she had looked at their meeting. Yet, her distinctive blonde hair was exactly as he remembered it. A vivid image of her smiling face flashed through his mind, and a sudden, hot flush spread across his cheeks. Sweat began to bead on his skin as he grit his teeth, cursing that this was happening again. He felt a familiar, vigorous heat rising within him, a libido that had been overwhelming ever since he hit puberty. He had been told that intense exercise would solve the problem, so he had trained himself to the point of becoming a swordmaster, but it had been no use. He worried that at this rate, he would end up with the same shameful reputation as the other lecherous men of the imperial family, like Ailde Evelyn, who had died of exhaustion, or Pablo, who was killed while building a harem. He thought of Fried, who was known for being devout and abstinent, and felt a surge of resentment. He tried to force himself to forget about Levi, reminding himself that she brought up the picnic and clearly preferred his brother. He told himself firmly that he could not afford to have any women in his life if he truly wanted to reach his goal of becoming the perfect emperor. Where there is an entrance ceremony, an after-party always follows, and the freshman welcome party at the academy was widely known as a highlight event for the empire's high society. As the grand ballroom hummed with the murmur of 100 conversations, Levi stepped through the doors. The sharp clack of her heels echoed against the polished floor as she scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for a specific person. Right now, she was looking for the novel's female lead, Isla Reiner, so she could carry out the second part of her plan to stop Damien's rebellion before it ever began. However, despite the size of the room and the density of the guests, she was having a difficult time finding her. She spotted Damien across the room and felt a familiar pang of annoyance mixed with embarrassment. She paused near a table where a group of noblemen sat, ducking her head slightly as she overheard them gossiping. One of the men laughed, noting that Levi was just a baron's daughter, yet she was living in that rundown campus dormitory. Another man joined in with a snicker, telling the others that he heard the money her parents left her was all tied up, so she was barely scraping by. Levi's eyes narrowed as she listened to the jerks running their mouths. She wondered if they were talking about Isla at first, but realized they were mocking her social standing. She thought to herself that with people like this constantly insulting her, it was no wonder the original Levi had stayed away. She turned to leave, deciding the entire party was a waste of time, when she heard a voice mention that defect had enrolled in the academy too. She paused mid-step, her eyes hardening as the man continued his insults. He mentioned that she was the heir to the family called the Empire's Sword, yet she was so frail that all she did was chase men around like a lovesick puppy. A noblewoman nearby swirled her wine with a cruel smile, remarking that if it were her, she would have bitten her tongue and died of shame long ago. Levi felt a surge of cold fury, thinking that these pricks really had some nerve. One of the men flinched as he noticed Levi staring at them. She walked toward their table, her heels clicking decisively. She stopped before the man with the headband, a youth named Ivan Kald. He was the successor to Viscount Kald, coming from a family of knights that had served House Heron for generations. Ivan offered a mocking greeting, PFFing as he looked her up and down. He muttered that it seemed she had picked up some bad habits. Levi tilted her head, asking for a pardon and questioning what exactly he had just said. Ivan didn't back down, wondering if her memories of the past were hazy or if she was simply going to faint again. Levi's expression remained perfectly calm, but the air around her began to vibrate with mana. She decided that while she was here, she might as well teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. With a sharp whir of energy, a wine glass on their table suddenly shattered into 1,000 pieces, drenching Ivan in red liquid. He jumped back in shock, shouting to know what the hell had happened. Levi looked at him with mock disappointment, stating that she thought the successor to the Empire's Shield family would be able to block a simple accident like that. She stepped closer, her eyes glowing as she told him that if she were him, she would bite her tongue to avoid bringing any further shame upon his family name. Ivan groaned in frustration, calling out her name, but Levi slammed her hand onto the table with a deafening thud. She leaned in until they were inches apart, asking him if he wanted to find out which one of them was truly stronger. She suggested they could fight right then and there with their family's honor on the line. The surrounding nobles watched in stunned silence as she reminded Ivan that even if she were defective, she was still a Heron. She noted to herself that thanks to this society's rigid hierarchy, no knight of his status could ever truly challenge her family. Ivan grit his teeth and turned away, TS King as he retreated. Levi watched him go, thinking that he was all bark and no bite. Having dealt with the distractions, she focused back on her mission. She knew Isla was likely holed up in her empty dormitory right now, blaming herself for her own misfortune. As Levi walked toward the more secluded areas of the campus, she was struck by how gloomy and dark the dormitories looked. She thought to herself that her living conditions in her previous life were actually better than this, and living in such a place would give anyone depression. She felt a heavy weight in her chest, knowing there was another reason why she was so worried about Isla. Right now, the girl was essentially being held hostage by her own uncle and forced to live an isolated life, just like Levi once had. She recalled the details of the novel, where Isla's parents had passed away in a carriage accident when she was young. Their will had stated that the person who looked after Isla until her graduation would be paid 1,000 gold, but she wouldn't be allowed to withdraw her inheritance from the bank until she finished her studies. Despite the trust her parents had placed in their family, all of Isla's remaining relatives only tried to claim her inheritance for themselves. Her uncle had pretended to care for his niece while secretly plotting to kill her and make it look like an accident. In the original story, right when Isla was on the brink of death, the male lead, Fried, had appeared and saved her. Isla had fallen for Fried's strength, and the two of them eventually became a power couple brimming with divine power. Levi realized that if she could make them meet even earlier and bring them together now, she could stop Damien's rebellion from ever taking root. A sudden rustle in the nearby bushes broke her concentration. Levi spun around, her eyes wide as she asked what was there. A dark shape swooped through the air, and she realized it was a bat. She felt a strange whir of energy coming from the creature and wondered if it was really just a bat, or something more suspicious. Deciding not to take any chances, she declared she would summon a weapon. With a sharp whoosh and a metallic shing, she manifested a glowing dagger made of pure mana. She hurled the blade with a determined shout, and it cut through the air with a whistle. The blade struck true, and she whispered, "Bullseye," as the creature fell. She let out a small breath, noting that all her recent practice had finally paid off. She acknowledged that while she still couldn't use a full longsword yet, she was becoming more proficient with smaller weapons. She suddenly sensed another presence and asked who was there. She turned as a girl stepped out from behind a large tree, her long silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. The girl was trembling, clutching her dress as she offered a stuttered apology, insisting she wasn't trying to spy on Levi. Levi stared at her in shock, realizing this was Isla. She looked at the terrified girl and asked what she was doing over there. Watching the silver-haired girl with a look of awe, Levi marveled at her appearance, acknowledging that it was no wonder she was heralded as the goddess's manifestation in the original story. The moonlight caught the shimmer of Isla's long, pale hair as she stood there, looking every bit the tragic heroine. Levi shook her head firmly, snapping out of her daze and reminding herself that now was not the time to be starstruck. She assured Isla that she didn't need to apologize, admitting that she was the one who had been randomly looking around the area. Stepping forward with a gentle grace, Levi decided to formally introduce herself, announcing that she was also a new student at the academy and that her name was Levi Heron. Isla's eyes widened in recognition as she repeated the name, her voice rising with surprise. She realized she was standing before the Lady of House Heron, the one who had actually inherited the power of the blessing. A look of pure admiration crossed Isla's face, and she remarked that it was no wonder Levi moved with such confidence. Levi was momentarily confused by the comment, but Isla quickly explained that she had heard the counts of House Heron could summon all kinds of swords. She clasped her hands together, telling Levi that it was such an immense honor to see her perform such a feat in person, adding that it was truly amazing. Levi was taken aback by the genuine praise, realizing that Isla wasn't treating her like a defect at all. She offered a small, grateful smile and thanked her. She then asked for the other girl's name, and Isla stood a bit straighter, introducing herself as the daughter of Baron Reiner. However, her confidence quickly faltered, and she began to fidget with her sleeves, admitting that Levi likely already knew who she was. She spoke sadly, noting that she was known as a lady in title only, someone who was barely managing to scrape by on the meager inheritance her parents had left behind. Levi looked at her with understanding, mentioning that she had actually come to the academy for very similar reasons. She revealed that her own uncle had tried to take over the Heron estate by forging documents and forcing her to enroll in the academy against her will. She shared that she had found out about his plan just before her enrollment and had taken him to court for embezzling her family's assets. Levi admitted that being betrayed by her own family didn't feel good, but the point she was trying to make was that Isla shouldn't feel too discouraged about her own circumstances. Isla watched her intently, her eyes fluttering with a new sense of hope. She asked softly if Levi truly believed she could become as strong as her someday. She confessed that no one had ever called her strong before, and the thought seemed to both scare and inspire her. Levi gave her a warm, encouraging smile, telling her that of course she could. Seizing the opportunity, Levi suggested that the two of them should spend time together starting tomorrow. Isla was startled by the sudden offer, asking for clarification if they were really going to be together. Levi confirmed it, explaining that if Isla spent time with her, she might be able to find a way to finally get stronger. Isla's face lit up with a mix of disbelief and joy as she processed the request. Before she could say more, Levi began to dash away into the night, waving her hand and telling Isla to meet her in the same spot at noon tomorrow. She called out a cheerful, sweet dreams, as she disappeared into the darkness. Isla reached out toward her, but Levi was already gone. As she ran, Levi thought to herself that while she expected Isla to push her away due to her timid personality, the encounter had actually gone much more smoothly than she anticipated. She felt a surge of optimism, believing that at this rate, she would be able to link Isla up with the male lead, Fried, in no time. Days later, the grand lecture hall was filled with the low murmurs of the student body. Several girls sat at their desks, whispering about how it looked like Prince Fried was absent once again. One of them sighed, complaining that she had thought they would finally get to see him this time. Her friend agreed, but noted that even so, they at least got to see Prince Damien's gorgeous face up close. They looked over at Damien, who sat nearby with his chin resting on his hand, looking perpetually bored and irritable. The girls giggled, deciding that seeing him was worth the trouble of signing up for the class in the first place. As the students settled in, a new wave of gossip began to stir when Levi and Isla entered the room together. A student watched them with a judgmental look, remarking that Levi Heron and Isla Reiner had been spending a lot of time together lately. Another person muttered that they were a funny pair, adding that since they were both considered defective, they must have a lot in common. Levi ignored the insults, though she thought to herself how exhausting it was to deal with such petty people. She decided that they could talk all they wanted as long as they stayed out of her way. She took her seat next to Isla, who looked at her with concern and asked if she was all right, noting that she looked a bit pale. Levi offered a reassuring smile, telling her she was fine and had just trained a little too hard the day before. She reflected on the fact that it had already been a week since she met Isla and looked at her private checklist. Her goals were clearly laid out: enroll in the academy, get the male and female leads together, and practice using the blessing to build her stamina. She felt confident that her plan was proceeding without a single hitch. However, one detail still bothered her. She hadn't been able to find the corpse of the bat that had been spying on her, though she had a strong hunch as to who had sent it. The heavy doors of the lecture hall creaked open as the professor walked in, commanding everyone to quiet down and pay attention as he began the lecture. This man was Gillian Roas, the Academy's most popular demon studies professor. Levi watched him warily, knowing that he was also consort Iselda's younger brother and a staunch supporter of the second prince. In the original story, he was a cruel man who had not only driven Damien's mother to her death but had also used his green-eyed bat familiars to drive a wedge between Fried and Isla. Levi realized that since he had sent a bat to spy on her, he was definitely up to something sinister. Gillian stood at the podium, explaining that demons were filthy beings born from sin, as decreed by the goddess herself. He moved with an arrogant air, stating that these creatures tended to cling to those who shared the same sinful nature as them. He used a demon of lust as an example, noting that it sought out promiscuous humans. He warned the class that once a demon latched onto a person, they would lose their reason entirely and turn into nothing more than a mindless beast. He concluded that it was the sacred duty of the temple and the paladins to protect the people of the empire from such monsters. He then announced that they would take a look at an actual demon, gesturing toward an assistant who rattled a small, covered cage into the room. He explained that there was a low-level demon inside and mentioned that although Prince Fried was busy with his work as captain of the paladins, he had captured the creature alive specifically for educational purposes. Gillian pulled back the cloth with a sharp flap, revealing a grotesque, serpent-like demon that let out a piercing hiss from behind the bars. The professor turned his gaze toward the students, stating that it was now time for a lesson on how to subdue such a creature. He looked directly at Levi Heron with a mocking smirk, noting that House Heron was famous for being the Empire's sword. He challenged her, asking why she didn't use her blessing to give the entire class a demonstration of her skills. The room filled with the hushed whispers of the other students as they stared at her. One girl wondered if Levi could even swing a sword when she appeared so frail, while another person remarked that since she was a heron, she should surely be able to subdue a minor demon. Damien watched the exchange from his seat, his expression unreadable. The whispers grew more pointed, with someone suggesting that if she couldn't even take down a low-level demon, she had no right to be called the Empire's sword. Gillian watched her intently, his voice dripping with false concern as he addressed her, saying that if the task seemed too difficult, she only had to say so. Levi remained perfectly composed. She addressed him respectfully, telling him it was fine and calling him Your Grace. She stood up and tapped her fingers against her desk, thinking to herself that she was the sole heir of House Heron, after all. As she stepped toward the front of the room, she noted that Gillian didn't seem to know she had already caught his bat familiar spying on her. She felt the mana within her begin to surge, realizing she had been gathering energy for an entire week just in case a situation like this arose. With a sudden, brilliant flash of light, she summoned a glowing mana sword that cut through the air with a sharp whistle. Gillian's eyes widened in genuine shock as he gasped at the sheer intensity of the mana she was projecting. Levi gripped the hilt firmly, her eyes focused as the energy whooshed around her. She knew that using this much power would put a significant strain on her weak body for a while, but she decided it would be well worth it. With a decisive strike, the mana blade whammed into the cage, and the ground thudded under the force of the impact. The demon let out a final, dying sound as it was completely annihilated, its form dissolving into a faint mist. The lecture hall fell into a stunned silence as Gillian stared in disbelief. The other students were equally shocked, their eyes wide as a soft wow escaped someone's lips. Suddenly, the room erupted into a round of applause. Levi bowed politely to her peers, offering a bright thank you as she made her way back to her seat. Damien watched her walk away, leaning his chin on his hand as he thought about how strange the situation was. He wondered if this was really the same Levi Heron he had known before. Gillian cleared his throat to regain control of the class, moving on with the lecture. He explained that as they had just witnessed, demons could be defeated with divine power, the Heron's blessing, or high-level mana. However, he clarified that the only way to completely and permanently annihilate a demon was to throw it into a pond filled with holy water from the Great Temple. He added that this was exactly why Prince Fried was so busy with his paladin duties. He then told Levi she could return to her seat, and she bowed again, offering a quiet confirmation. As she walked back, Gillian glared at her with a look of pure loathing. He wondered how a defective heron could have pulled off such a feat, thinking to himself that she was just as irritating as her father. Levi sat down, thinking sarcastically to herself that she offered her apologies to the professor. Damien's thoughts drifted to the history of House Heron, remembering how they were the Empire's sword and held the duty of protecting the imperial family from demons regardless of who sat on the throne. He recalled how the house had drawn a line with him in the past under the guise of remaining neutral. But he remembered seeing Levi have a private conversation with the first prince the moment she arrived at the academy. He hadn't been able to hear their discussion because the prince had sensed his presence, but he knew he couldn't let anyone who wouldn't side with him run wild. He decided to retreat for now, planning to deal with her when the time was finally right. Isla leaned toward Levi, her eyes shining with admiration as she told her she was amazing earlier. She whispered that no one would be able to say anything bad about her now. Levi laughed softly, but then Isla let out a small sigh, admitting that she couldn't wait to become a second-year student so she could finally learn simple magic. Levi looked at the silver-haired girl, thinking to herself that Isla wouldn't just learn simple magic. She was destined to become powerful enough to destroy an entire capital. She remembered that in the original novel, Isla's power was set to awaken a year later during a magic studies class. Levi resolved that if things went according to her plan, she would find a way to make that awakening happen much faster. Turning to Isla, she asked if the girl wanted to go to the training hall to train with her starting today. Isla was surprised, asking if it would be just the two of them. When Levi confirmed it, Isla's expression brightened instantly, and she declared she would love to, adding that she was willing to learn anything Levi taught her. Levi felt a slight chill at the wording, wondering if the answer was a bit off, but she brushed it off as her imagination. They made their way toward the academy's training hall, a building that had been practically abandoned over the years. Levi knew that a tremendous power was hidden there, a secret located right beneath the floorboards. The founding emperor had built the hall using stone from Nim's mountain, which contained the goddess's own divine power. Since that fact hadn't been revealed to the public yet, Levi realized she had this natural divine power carpet all to herself. She let out a small, triumphant laugh, noting that she could train and recover her strength at the same time. She also recalled with a frown that in the original novel, Damien had taken advantage of this very location to have his way with Isla, and she thought to herself that he was a total pervert. She looked around the hall, noticing it was surprisingly clean for an abandoned place, and wondered if there was a caretaker secretly looking after it. Isla stepped out from a changing area, looking shy as she asked if she was wearing her new uniform properly. She apologized for the trouble, admitting she had never worn clothes like those before. Levi's heart gave a sudden thump as she looked at her friend, but the moment was ruined by a dark presence. A man's hand clenched into a tight fist as a voice muttered about a bastard. Isla was startled, calling out Levi's name as a dark energy began to swirl. Levi stared at Damien as he appeared, wondering how he dared to try and take advantage of the innocent female lead. She resolved that as long as she was there, he wouldn't be able to lay a finger on Isla. She grabbed Isla's hand and pulled her away, telling her they were leaving. As they ran, Damien stood in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the blonde girl as he whispered the name Levi Heron. The grand spires of the academy reached toward the sky as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone courtyards. In a secluded corner of the grounds, two figures moved in a rhythmic dance of training. Damien watched from the shadows of a nearby balcony, his gaze fixed on the blonde girl as he reflected on his own reasons for being there. He had come to this spot on purpose to avoid attracting any unwanted attention, yet he found that someone was already here. Levi was busy coaching the silver-haired Isla, telling her that since it was her first day, she would begin by teaching her the proper way to hold a sword. Damien observed Levi's movements with a critical eye, wondering if she should really be straining herself when her body was famously weak. He surmised that after her impressive demonstration in the lecture hall, she must have completely run out of mana. He recalled the moments back in the hall when everyone had been singing her praises. As a magic swordsman himself, he could tell right away that she had not only used up all the mana she had painstakingly gathered for a week but had likely tapped into the reserves she was supposed to use over the next few days as well. He watched her steady Isla's stance, thinking that she must have put on that entire act just to shed her long-standing image as Heron's defect. It was a rather clever strategy in his eyes, but it made him wonder why she felt the need to go that far. He questioned if she had truly had a sudden change of heart, or if she was still the same Levi Heron he had known in the past. Nearby, Levi encouraged Isla, telling her she was doing good work. The sound of rhythmic hups and haps filled the air as the two girls continued their physical exertion. Damien leaned against a pillar, his arms crossed, watching as Levi stayed behind after Isla finished to practice her own swings. He wondered if she was crazy, worrying that if she continued to push herself in her current state, she would surely end up fainting again. Suddenly, as Levi stepped forward, her foot caught on an uneven stone. She let out a startled sound as she began to wobble, her balance completely failing her. Damien didn't hesitate, his eyes narrowing as he shouted for her to watch out. He lunged forward, his movements a blur of speed. Levi let out a pained groan as she felt herself collide with something solid and warm. She found herself face planted directly into Damien's chest, her hands clutching his shirt for support. She let out a sharp gasp of shock, looking up to see Prince Damien holding her. A deep blush rushed to her face as she stammered, asking why His Highness was even here. Damien's own cheeks flushed with a visible blush, and he flinched slightly when she asked if he could move. Levi quickly hopped back, offering a frantic apology for the accidental contact. As she regained her composure, a wave of suspicion washed over her. She wondered what was going on and how he could have even known about this secret training spot. A dark thought crossed her mind, and she wondered if he had been hiding there specifically to ambush Isla. She faltered, looking at him warily, but Damien spoke up before she could accuse him. He told her that he didn't know what she was thinking but assured her she had the wrong idea, explaining that he had always used this place for his own training. Levi was visibly startled by the revelation, offering a sheepish apology as she realized her mistake. She bowed deeply to him, and Damien asked her why a member of House Heron, who should have access to the best facilities and personal knights, would choose to train in such a run-down, abandoned place. Levi looked away, admitting that she simply didn't want to make her family's knights and vassals worry about her health. She knew they cared for her deeply, and because of that, she didn't want them to see her in such a vulnerable state. As she spoke, Damien felt a sudden, sharp pang of recognition. He looked at her and whispered her name, being reminded of a moment from his own childhood. He saw a vision of his mother, who had once thanked him for his worry but insisted she was fine, telling him not to look so sad. He remembered how she had gently wiped his face and asked him to go back to his room for a while, claiming she was all right even when she wasn't. Levi offered a confused pardon, breaking his trance. Damien turned his head away, clearing his throat with a sharp ahem. He told her bluntly that she clearly wanted people to stop calling her a defect, but pointed out that her demonstration in the Demon Studies class was not a long-term solution. He glared at her, stating that such a display wouldn't work against the truly cunning and persistent nobles of the court. Levi realized he had seen right through her intentions, which didn't surprise her given his reputation. However, she was baffled as to why he was offering her advice at all, since she was under the impression that he didn't like her. She asked him directly what his intent was, and Damien looked her in the eye, telling her to consider his words an apology for underestimating her on the day of the entrance ceremony. Levi was stunned, wondering if that notorious perfectionist had actually just apologized to her. Damien cleared his throat again, adding that he simply believed effort should be rewarded properly and insisted that was all there was to it. Levi felt a smile tug at her lips, repeating the word effort back to him. She thanked him for his kind words, and Damien thought to himself that while her hard work was supposed to remain a secret, it made him surprisingly happy that someone had finally noticed his own efforts. He looked dazed for a moment as he watched her, before quickly regaining his cold exterior. He told her not to push herself too hard, reminding her that House Heron was the imperial family's sword. He turned to leave, and Levi offered a respectful confirmation. She called out that she would take his advice and go rest now, to which he simply replied that she should suit herself. As he walked away, Levi peeks after him, reflecting on how her perception of him was shifting. At the entrance ceremony, he had seemed like a heartless brute who was destined to kill her, but now he seemed to have a surprisingly human side. She looked up at the twilight sky, realizing that the original novel was written entirely from the protagonist's perspective. While Damien was clearly a villain to Fried and Isla, he hadn't actually done anything villainous in this timeline yet. She considered that perhaps she should look at his character through a different lens. She knew the reason he wanted the throne was to protect himself and the people he loved, and that he was ultimately a lonely person trying his best to be perfect. She realized he might be the character she had the most in common with. She decided to quit denouncing him as a villain since she only knew bits and pieces of his true life. She resolved to keep an eye on him from an appropriate distance to ensure he didn't turn evil and kill her in the future. She even felt a bit guilty, mentally apologizing for having called him a pervert earlier. Back in the quiet of the hall, the sound of boots clacked against the stone as Damien returned to his practice. He was huffing and puffing, his body drenched in sweat as he leaned heavily on his wooden training sword. He brushed his damp hair back from his forehead, his breathing heavy as he muttered that the situation was driving him insane. He stood there in the moonlight, his shirt open and his muscles taut, struggling with the overwhelming intensity of the desires that continued to plague his mind. After her parents died in a tragic accident, Isla Reiner's life transformed into a living hell. She stood amidst the shadows of mourning, a small girl overwhelmed by a sudden sense of helplessness, unable to figure out what she should do. Her guardian spoke with feigned sympathy, claiming her parents must have written a will like that because they did not trust her abilities. They preached about how the Reiner family shared everything from their prosperity to their burdens, promising that they would remain her guardians until she grew up and became the head of the family. It was all a web of lies. As the young girl looked into the dark eyes of her relatives, she realized these people were not worried about her, nor were they mourning the death of her parents in the slightest. She knew deep down that someday, they would turn their swords on her. Even as she looked toward the future of graduating from the academy, the chilling thought remained that she might simply die once she returned to her family. The dark memories shattered as Levi's voice called out from the present, pulling Isla back to reality. The blonde noblewoman commanded her to look over here, telling her that she had to fight back without any hesitation. The training hall echoed with the repetitive rhythm of wooden swords striking one another as they moved across the stone floor. With a sudden dash, Isla lunged forward, her silver hair trailing behind her as she closed the distance. The sounds of their weapons clashing filled the air, and for a moment, their blades remained locked in a test of strength. Pushing back against the resistance, Levi offered a bright smile, assuring Isla that she could indeed do it. She praised the girl, noting that she was getting pretty good at the basics now. Surprised by the genuine compliment, Isla's expression softened as she lowered her weapon with a quick swish. She thanked Levi, her voice trembling slightly as she confessed that if it weren't for her, she would have still been wallowing in despair. It had been so long since she felt such a sense of hope that she could no longer hold back her emotions. As tears began to stream down her face, Levi panicked, frantically asking why she was crying. They eventually sat down together to rest by a fountain, where the full extent of the uncle's cruelty finally came to light. After the passing of her parents, Isla's uncle had seized power as the acting head of the family, using her living costs as a pathetic excuse to sell off the family estate and fire all the servants. He had spent years conditioning her to believe that she could never become the head of the family with her own abilities. Hearing this made Levi's blood boil, thinking to herself that the girl's uncle was a real piece of work. Clenching her fist in indignation, Levi told Isla not to be so hard on herself, reminding her that she was only 7 years old at the time. She declared that her relatives were just acting out because they were not worthy of her inheritance. The kindness moved Isla to a genuine grin, and she whispered that she was so glad she had met Levi. She vowed that she would no longer just take it lying down and would find a way to fight back while she was staying at the dormitory. Seeing the fire in the girl's eyes, Levi looked at her seriously and asked if she would nullify her parents' will to receive her inheritance sooner if she could. Isla looked up in shock, wondering if there was really a way to receive her inheritance sooner. Levi knew the original story well. In the novel, Isla was destined to fail in receiving her inheritance and suffer until the male lead, Fried, eventually rescued her. Levi mused that perhaps the male lead always showed up when the female lead was at her lowest just because it made him look good, but she refused to let her friend endure that pain. With a firm nod, Levi promised that she would help, deciding that while Isla could still end up with Fried later, there was no need for her to suffer now. A few days passed, and the two met again under the bright sun of the academy grounds. Isla handed over a stack of papers with a quick flutter, explaining they were the documents Levi had asked for, along with a business plan she had written up herself. Levi flipped through the pages, impressed that the girl only had a few days to write it, but it still looked remarkably feasible. She noted that Isla's parents had run a huge trading company, and that talent clearly ran in the blood. She told Isla that she did good work and this would be the perfect way to demonstrate her abilities as the head of the family. When Isla curiously asked what she was planning to do with those documents, Levi just poked her cheek playfully, telling her it was a secret for now. Their conversation was interrupted by the murmurs of students and the sight of servants moving large porcelain jars across the courtyard. Isla pointed them out, suggesting they must be moving some things for tomorrow's spring picnic. Levi's mind raced as she realized it was already time for that event. To the rest of the school, the spring picnic was one of the events meant to promote camaraderie within the academy, but Levi knew the reality was a networking war between the nobles. Right now, the battle for the position of crown prince was fierce, so even the seating arrangements would reflect people's political stance. Levi let out a heavy sigh, wishing they would just assign their seats to avoid the headache. Turning to her friend, Levi asked if she had happened to receive any seat invitations. Isla admitted that she had received around 10, which left Levi gaping in shock. Isla began counting them off on her fingers, explaining she got 1 from her father's friend's son, 2 from a family that started a firearms business, 2 from families of knights, and the rest from the people she met in her demon studies class. Levi realized it was because of that class that others had seen her true value, even though she liked being the only one who knew it. When asked what she would do, Isla looked Levi in the eyes and said the number of invitations didn't matter. All that mattered was whether she could sit with her. However, a look of determination crossed the silver-haired girl's face as she clasped Levi's hands tightly. She told her that she actually thought she would be sitting at a different table this time, promising to work harder to become a woman and a friend worthy of her. The day of the spring picnic arrived, and the academy grounds were filled with the constant chatter of students dressed in their finest attire. Amidst the sea of people, the sound of heels clacking against the stone pavement drew everyone's attention as 2 striking figures made their entrance. One student urged another to look over there, noting that the ladies of House Heron and House Reiner had arrived together. The sight of Levi Heron caused a stir, with onlookers wondering if she had always been that beautiful. Levi offered a serene smile to the crowd, seemingly unaware of the growing murmurs behind her. Seated at a nearby table, Ivan Kald took a slow sip of his wine, his expression darkening as he clicked his tongue and muttered that the whole situation was ridiculous. As he stared at Levi, his mind drifted back to a quiet room where he had once sat with his father. He remembered his father telling him that House Kald was the Empire's shield while House Heron was the Empire's sword, emphasizing that a sword and shield were inseparable. His father had squeezed his hands firmly, reminding him that both families served the imperial family and that they, as the Kalds, must guard House Heron's back and follow their lead. His father had commanded him never to forget their family's honorable duty. In the present, Ivan scoured the garden with a look of disdain, wondering what the point was in clinging to those outdated ideals when the battle for the position of crown prince was at its height. His hand creaked against the table as he thought about how, no matter who House Heron sided with, he was personally backing the second prince. He knew that even if the first prince used new nobles and merchants to grow his support base, he would never beat Prince Fried, who had the backing of House Roas, the consort's family, and the temple. Ivan noted that he was not sitting at the same table as Prince Fried, but being only 4 tables away meant he could at least greet him. His gaze shifted back to Levi, observing that she was sitting at a table in the very center of the garden, neither on the left with the second prince nor on the right with the first prince. He concluded that she was just pretending to be neutral because neither side would accept her, and he vowed to use this chance to get close to Prince Fried and leave that defect in the dust. A sudden scoff left his lips as a group of girls approached Levi's table. One noblewoman called out to Lady Levi, saying it was nice to see her and asking if she was feeling better now. She mentioned she had been wondering when she would get the chance to say hello. Behind them, other students whispered that maybe the rumors about Levi being defective were exaggerated. They noted that House Heron's official stance was neutral and she was maintaining it perfectly. Seeing this, another student decided he should hurry over and say hello as well. Ivan watched the crowd dash toward her, realizing that the nobles' opinions of her were changing rapidly. He suspected she had sat in the center of the garden on purpose just so this would happen. To him, her wishy-washy actions were unacceptable and would not help their family at all. He turned his back on the scene, disgusted by the display. Meanwhile, Levi sat calmly, thinking that things were going very smoothly. She felt she had successfully established herself as the heir of a neutral family. As she raised her cup to her lips, she recalled the original story, remembering that some demons were supposed to attack next. Since they were only low-level demons in the book, she figured she should just stay out of it. However, a sudden ripple in the air made her flinch. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as she sensed a surge of demonic energy. The sensation was so strong that she realized it did not belong to a low-level demon at all. She looked around, wondering why no one else could sense it, and decided she had to investigate this herself. Turning to her friend, she told Isla to hold down the fort and promised she would be right back. With a sudden dash, she ran across the grounds, her dress fluttering as she hurried toward a specific building. She came to a halt, huffing for breath, and realized she was standing in front of Damien's tea house. This was exactly where the demonic energy was coming from. She stepped toward the entrance and knocked loudly, asking if His Highness was inside. Inside, there was a frantic sound of scrambling before the door creaked open. Damien appeared in the doorway, looking disheveled and covered in a cold sweat. He asked what brought her there, but Levi quickly bowed, pardoning the intrusion. She knew she needed to word her explanation carefully because Damien was incredibly sensitive about anything related to demons due to the rumors that he was impure. She explained that she had sensed some demonic energy and was just looking around the area. Damien was visibly startled, so she quickly added that she could be mistaken but thought she should make sure. Damien realized that no one could detect demonic energy as well as someone with House Heron's blessing. As he processed this, a dark, purple mist began to waft through the room. Levi gasped as the demonic energy became overwhelmingly strong. A shadowy creature began to crack through the floor, and a massive, eel-like demon with glowing red eyes emerged. Levi realized this had to be a high-level demon at the very least, or perhaps even a transcendental demon, the first one in history. As the creature let out a swoosh of movement, Damien stepped forward, but Levi shouted for him to stay back. She gulped, realizing the monster was much bigger than she had imagined. Terror gripped her as she realized there was no demon like this in the original story. The beast let out a deafening roar, its jaw unhinging as it prepared to strike. Levi prepared herself to intervene, but the prince suddenly stepped in front of her. With a firm, commanding tone, he ordered her to step back, warning her that she could not handle a demon like this with her current power. Arcs of pink electricity began to crackle around his hand as he gathered his strength, culminating in a brilliant, blinding blast of energy directed straight at the creature. The demon recoiled, its form crackling with the residue of the prince's power as it let out another agonizing screech. Despite the intensity of the attack, the creature remained standing, leaving Damien to realize that while the beast was huge, it seemed strangely weaker than it should have been. Levi watched the exchange with growing dread, sensing that the energy radiating from the monster was far more sinister than that of a low-level demon. Damien continued his advance, his footsteps heavy against the floor, while Levi internally debated the creature's nature, knowing that high-level demons were notorious for targeting the strongest enemies first. Fearing for his safety, she reached out and shouted for His Highness not to approach the demon. The beast's crimson eyes flared with a lethal glare before it lunged, its long, muscular form slithering through the air with terrifying speed. Before Damien could react, the creature's purple, translucent limbs lashed out and coiled around him. Levi screamed for the prince as the monster began to squeeze his body with crushing force. Damien groaned in agony, his hands clawing at the slimy appendages as they tightened around his throat. In that moment of crisis, Levi remembered the lore of the world. These specific demons could warp their bodies into tentacles or slime as needed, allowing them to take over human bodies to feed on their base desires. As she watched him struggle, the horrifying truth became clear. This was a demon of lust. Only 15 minutes prior to the chaos, the tea house had been quiet, save for the sound of Damien's heavy, labored breathing. He had collapsed onto the plush cushions of his sofa, feeling as though something were fundamentally wrong with his body. Ever since he ran into Levi Heron in the abandoned training hall, or perhaps even as far back as the entrance ceremony, his body had begun to heat up whenever he thought of her. He let out a frustrated huff, burying his face in his hands as he sat on the edge of the couch. The more he tried to forget her, the clearer her image became in his mind. This internal turmoil was the very reason he had spent so long trying to keep his distance from women. He was plagued by uncertainty, unsure if his body had ended up in this state because he lacked divine power or if his very nature was simply lustful. He looked down at his trembling hand, clenching it into a tight fist as he berated himself, feeling like a scumbag for getting aroused while thinking about a sickly young lady. He gritted his teeth, acknowledging that she had never tried to seduce him on purpose. Even so, he couldn't help but wonder why she had chosen to wear such provocative clothes during their training sessions. The memory of her form made his heart race and a visible frustration manifest in his lap. He pressed his hand against his brow, cursing his inability to walk around the spring picnic in such a compromised state. Suddenly, a loud knock at the door made him halt. He froze as a familiar voice called out, asking if His Highness was inside. Damien's face flushed a deep red as he recognized the voice as Levi's. He scrambled to straighten his clothes and fasten his shirt, muttering a curse under his breath. He wondered why she kept appearing before him, constantly reminding him of his most shameful desires. He knew he had to become the emperor and that he had to be more perfect than he was now, but he feared showing himself in such an impure state. He understood that demons tended to cling to those who shared their sinful nature. For example, A demon of lust sought out promiscuous humans. Back in the present, Damien found himself suspended in the air, flailing as he struggled against the demon's grip. He felt hot and dizzy, his mind slowly starting to fade as the creature's tail began to slither up toward his face. Sensing his impending collapse, Levi felt a jolt of protective instinct and rushed forward. With a swift whoosh of her dress, she summoned a glowing mana sword and let out a sharp cry as she lunged. She swung the blade with a powerful arc and stabbed the demon directly through its torso. The beast let out a final, gurgling roar before its body began to dissolve and eventually exploded into a cloud of dark smoke. The remains of the creature dripped onto the floor as Damien was released, plopping down onto the ground in a heap. Levi rushed to his side, frantically asking if he was all right and telling him that she would go outside to call for help. However, Damien's hand shot out and grabbed her, his voice a strained whisper as he told her not to go. He claimed he was fine and begged her not to call anyone, asking her to simply leave quietly. Levi flinched, looking at the man huffing for air. She realized this was a disastrous situation. An obsessive man with already raging hormones had been attacked by a demon of lust, of all things. An internal alarm went off in her head, telling her she had to run away immediately. She dashed toward the double doors, but as she reached for the handles, she came to a sudden pause. She worried about what would happen to Damien if she left him alone in this state, knowing that with all the rumors already linking him to demons, he wouldn't even be able to ask anyone else for help. She looked back at him over her shoulder and apologized, explaining that the door wouldn't open. Damien looked up in confusion, prompting her to explain that it seemed the locking spell had been damaged while she was fighting the demon. Levi turned back toward him with a look of firm resolve, reminding him that she was the imperial family's sword and therefore could not abandon an injured member of the royalty. Damien staggered to his feet, swaying as he promised her that he wouldn't hold her accountable for whatever might happen next. He wobbled toward her, his eyes dark with intensity, while Levi nervously urged him not to come any closer. He gripped his chest and looked at her through his messy dark hair, warning her that he wouldn't stop unless she wanted something even worse to happen to her. He squeezed the fabric of his shirt, his voice thick with a desperate heat as he told her that his warning was in order. Levi realized the gravity of the situation, muttering to herself that she was not the one in true danger here. It was the prince's soul and reputation at stake. She watched him stagger toward her, swaying on his feet as he let out a low groan of agony. As he reached out to her, Levi called out to him in concern, but her voice was drowned out by the heavy silence of the tea house. She looked at his pained expression and decided she couldn't simply stand by. Pursing her lips with resolve, she stepped toward him. She decided to use her power, lifting her glowing hand toward his forehead to purify the demonic energy with her blessing. She hoped this would make him feel a bit better, and as the radiant light flowed from her palms, a soft swoosh of energy surrounded them both. However, as the light intensified, Levi felt a sudden wave of heat wash over her own body. She realized that she had likely inhaled some of the demonic energy during the fight, and she wondered if Damien was feeling the same intoxicating fire right now. Damien remained quiet for a moment, his head bowed, until Levi tentatively reached out to check on him again. Suddenly, his eyes glinted with a dangerous orange light. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrists in a crushing grip, making her let out a sharp eek of surprise. With a powerful pull, he sent her falling back onto the floor, the weight of his body pressing her down with a heavy plop. Levi looked up at him in shock, breathless as she whispered his title, but Damien leaned in close to her ear. He whispered that when he touched her, he finally felt better, and he asked with a dark hunger if he could touch her some more. Levi's heart throbbed against her ribs as he pressed his body firmly against hers. He muttered for her to answer him and urged her to hurry, his hands gripping her dress with a frantic need. Levi looked away, her face flushed with heat, and told him he could touch her, provided it was just a little bit. Damien leaned down, a dark grin spreading across his face as he confessed that he hadn't expected her to allow it. He reminded her that he had warned her to stay away, and as he began to rustle the fabric of her gown, he leaned down and claimed her lips in a deep, desperate kiss. Outside, the spring picnic had descended into total chaos as dark clouds of energy swirled through the air. Students screamed that demons had appeared, and a noble youth with pink hair swung his sword with a fierce shout, commanding everyone to stay calm and take the monsters down. He cursed the situation, wondering what on earth had happened at the picnic and why these demons had suddenly shown up out of nowhere. Back inside the secluded tea house, the atmosphere was a world away from the panic outside. Damien and Levi were locked in a passionate embrace on the floor, the sounds of their labored breathing and soft kisses filling the room. Damien moved with a frantic energy, his lips trailing down her neck as he let out a low moan. Levi's mind raced as she lay beneath him, thinking that if she had only crushed the demon sooner, it wouldn't have been able to take over his body. She felt the situation spiraling further and further, but then a different thought occurred to her. She wondered if there was actually a reason why she shouldn't go through with this. She knew that Damien likely wouldn't remember what happened while the demon was controlling him, and she possessed the power of the blessing. She reasoned that once he satisfied his desires, the demonic energy might finally be purified. Though she had never tried something like this before, she felt herself being carried away by the lingering demonic energy. Damien stripped off his shirt, revealing his muscular physique, leaving Levi startled and breathless. She looked at him, her heart going baitum as she reconsidered her choices. Damien looked down at her, his face flushed and sweat dripping from his brow, and asked if it was truly okay to touch her more. Levi, trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation, looked into his eyes and told him that it was her first time, so she begged him to go slowly. Damien let out a soft laugh, his eyes narrowing with intensity as he noted that it was also his first time, so he couldn't make any promises. He leaned back in, and the world seemed to fade into a brilliant white light. Sometime later, the morning sun began to filter through the windows of the tea house. Levi sat up amidst the disheveled cushions, her hair a mess and her mind in a total daze. She thought to herself that the entire situation was absolutely insane, panicking as she realized what she had just done with the novel's final villain. She berated herself for getting carried away by the demonic energy, letting out an internal scream as she pulled her dress together with a quick rustle. Despite her internal crisis, she noticed that the air felt clear and the demonic energy had been completely purified thanks to her blessing. She glanced over at Damien, who was still fast asleep beside her, looking remarkably peaceful. She wondered if she should be glad this happened, but she felt a pang of guilt. She had hoped to maintain a friendly relationship with him while keeping an appropriate distance, but that plan had been shattered. She tried to convince herself that this was just a freak accident, comparing it to a car accident where the car just happened to be a transcendental demon. With a determined look, she decided that she had to run away before he woke up. She scrambled to her feet and hurried toward the door, which now opened with a soft creak. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the sleeping prince one last time. She whispered for him to get some sleep and begged him not to remember anything that had happened here. She shut the door behind her and vanished into the morning light. A few moments later, Damien began to stir, groaning as he clutched his head. He wondered if he had simply fallen asleep, but as he sat up, hazy fragments of the night flashed through his mind. He remembered a woman's voice asking him to slow down and his own voice asking if he was straining her. He flinched, his heart racing as he wondered what kind of memory that was. The horrifying thought occurred to him that he might have slept with Levi Heron, a prospect that terrified him since he had maintained his chastity all this time to ensure his claim to the throne. He tried to shake the thought, telling himself it couldn't be true and that it must have just been a dream born from his recent impure thoughts. However, as he moved, he realized his body felt oddly refreshed. He flapped the sheets aside and froze, his eyes widening in confusion as he looked down. He saw a faint, glowing mark on his skin that looked like a snake and wondered what the hell it could be. The carriage rattled along the path, its wheels jarring against the uneven earth as it moved through the vibrant, sun-dappled forest. Inside the cabin, Isla leaned forward with a concerned expression and asked if Levi was all right, noting that her face had been pale for quite some time. Levi leaned back against the plush cushions, looking visibly tired, and admitted she might have overexerted herself while dealing with that demon at the pic. Isla sighed, remarking that Levi must have been exhausted from the event even before the demon attack added to the strain. Levi rubbed her temples and confessed the truth was simply that she was low on stamina. Isla asked if she shouldn't be resting on a day like this, expressing that she felt bad for troubling her friend. Levi offered a soft, reassuring look and told her it was nonsense, pointing out that there might still be some demons remaining at the academy. She insisted she could not just leave her friend alone in the dormitory when it was still dangerous. Levi leaned her head against the side of the carriage and suggested they just stay at her estate until the campus was safe again. She playfully whined that she had always wanted to invite a friend over to her house anyway. Feeling shy but deeply grateful, Isla blushed and agreed to impose for just a little while, which prompted a cheerful shout of all right from Levi. However, as the carriage continued its steady rattle, Levi's expression grew serious. She wondered why a transcendental demon had shown up so suddenly, remembering that in the original novel, the demons at the picnic were only low-level. She felt thankful she was able to deal with it because of Damien's help, yet a lingering sense of dread remained. She questioned if she had really handled it properly, unable to shake a bad feeling about the entire encounter. Still, she reminded herself that Fried had stayed behind at the academy to handle the situation and felt certain the paladins would resolve things on their own. Levi eventually began to doze off, her head plopping onto her chest as sleep took hold. Isla watched her silently, her mind tracing back to the battle. She thought about how she had seen the paladins fighting and tried to copy their movements, finding it surprisingly easier than she expected. She was stunned to realize how much divine power she truly had inside her. Knowing that the Herons were the imperial family's sword, she realized Levi would have to fight like this more often. She vowed that if she honed her power some more, she would eventually be able to help Levi. She leaned in closer and whispered for Levi to sleep well and have sweet dreams. Meanwhile, at Luigi Reiner's estate, the calm of the night was shattered as an aide burst into the room. He called out for Lord Luigi with a sense of urgency. Luigi sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes and groaning as the aide announced he had an urgent report regarding Miss Isla. Luigi demanded to know what it was at such a late hour, his face twisted in irritation. The aide reported that some demons had appeared at the academy today and caused quite a commotion. Luigi gasped, frantically asking if Isla had died. When the aide confirmed that she was fortunately safe, Luigi let out a relieved phew, muttering that he had almost lost the inheritance. His relief turned to suspicion when he heard that the heir of House Heron had helped her. He glared at the subordinate, demanding to know why that defective Heron would interfere. The aide explained that he didn't know all the details but the two of them appeared quite close. Luigi dismissed the detail with a scoff, but the man's expression grew grave as he revealed that House Heron had filed a lawsuit against the bank regarding Miss Isla's inheritance. Luigi froze, his heart pounding with a sudden heavy thud as he asked what the aide had just said. The next morning, light spilled into a luxurious room at the Heron estate as a maid softly called out Miss Levi's name. There was a quiet rustle of fabric as the maid told her it was time to wake up, mentioning that Miss Isla was already waiting for her. Levi sat up with a long yawn, stretching her arms above her head. She thanked the maid, who noted that she was glad Levi had finally slept soundly for once, given that she usually woke at dawn to train. Levi rubbed her eyes and admitted it had been a while since she slept in, guessing she had pushed herself too hard with the training. She then instructed the maid to tell Isla to join her for breakfast in the annex, while the maid promised to have the kitchen prepare the best brunch possible. Once alone, Levi reached for a small, ornate box on the table. She thought to herself that the blue candy was the one with the contraceptive effect, popping one into her mouth and musing on how convenient magic really was. She noted that a single piece was enough to fully guard against pregnancy. She then picked up the morning paper, flapping it open to see the headlines. The front page reported that demons had appeared at the academy and eventually invaded the capital. It praised the second prince and his paladins for saving the day, while another section mentioned that the first prince was facing criticism for being late to the picnic. Levi chuckled at how the newspapers were always pitting the two princes against each other. However, she noticed there was no mention of the transcendental demon of lust. She wondered if it had been eliminated properly or if Damien had pulled some strings to keep it out of the papers. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts as a servant announced her meal was ready. Levi turned and replied that she would be right out. Outside in the sunlit garden, birds chirped as the two friends sat at a table laden with tea and macarons. Isla offered a bright smile and asked if Levi had slept well. Levi replied that she hadn't felt this refreshed in a long time. She then sat down with a soft plop and told Isla she had some good news. When Isla asked what it was, Levi extended an envelope and declared that she would be able to receive her inheritance soon. Isla froze in shock, asking how she had managed that already. With a confident grin, Levi explained that she had filed a lawsuit against the bank. She had used House Heron's skilled lawyers to find evidence that Isla's uncle had neglected her while acting as her guardian. Furthermore, they provided proof that Isla was capable of living independently as the new head of the family. Levi thought to herself that winning the lawsuit had been quite easy. She told Isla they were in the final stages now, so it should all be over soon. Isla stared at the letter, her hands trembling as tears welled in her eyes. Levi gently interrupted her thoughts, telling her not to say thank you or sorry. Instead, she asked Isla to stay with her at her home until she could find a decent house for herself. She reminded her friend that she had always wanted to have a friend over. Isla beamed, her heart full as she looked at the treats on the table. She began to chatter about their future, saying they would eat together every day, go on picnics, and go shopping on weekends. Levi watched her with a puzzled look, asking what was wrong and if she was even listening. Isla simply closed her eyes and smiled, telling Levi that she didn't care what they did as long as they did it together. 3 days had passed since the chaos of the spring picnic, and a peaceful light settled over the Grand Academy buildings. One of the paladins dashed toward his commander, reporting that they had finished patrolling the grounds as ordered. Fried Evelyn, the second prince and captain of the paladins, turned with a serene expression, telling his men they all did good work. He noted that they had worked hard for 3 days straight and urged them to head back to get some rest. When the knights curiously asked if he was leaving with them, Fried explained that he intended to take one more look around the academy before departing. His subordinates looked at him with touched expressions, their hands clasped in admiration. To them, it was exactly what they expected of Prince Fried. He was not only a man of immense divine power but someone who always put others first, truly living up to his reputation as the goddess's successor. They mused that if one were to create a person using only nobility and divine power, he would be the result. Fried paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on the architecture before he turned back to ask if the damaged dormitory had been repaired. The knight jolted to attention, confirming that it had. He explained that thanks to Lady Levi Heron taking Lady Isla Reiner away for her safety, the dormitory remained empty, allowing them to speed up the repairs significantly. Fried thought it was quite fortunate and decided that he should eventually have tea with Lady Levi to thank her for her assistance. The paladins began to giggle amongst themselves, playfully warning their captain to be careful, as they reminded him she was the lady who had once fainted due to her passionate, one-sided love for him. Fried waved them off with a small smile, telling them to stop and reminding them that it was rude to tease a lady in such a manner. The knights bowed deeply and headed back first, leaving the prince to walk the grounds in solitude. As his heavy footsteps echoed against the stone, Fried grew serious, remembering the unpleasant, transcendental demonic energy he had sensed during the picnic. Despite days of careful searching, he hadn't found a single trace of it again, making him wonder if he had simply been imagining things. Nearby, hidden within the lush greenery, Luigi Reiner was losing his mind. He staggered along, his hand trembling against a fence as he obsessed over his lost inheritance and the luxury he could have enjoyed for the rest of his life. He gritted his teeth, blaming everything on that wench Isla and the meddling of the defective Heron girl. His eyes were sunken and full of malice as he drew a sharp dagger with a metallic ring, vowing that he would never forgive them. He spotted Levi walking through the courtyard and let out a guttural shout, declaring that he would never forgive her. Levi turned in surprise just as the man called out her name and lunged with the blade. He dashed forward with a desperate speed, but before the steel could strike, a hand reached out and grabbed his arm. Fried had intervened, and with a sudden, forceful movement, he cracked the man's wrist. Luigi let out an agonizing scream as the dagger clattered to the floor with a loud clang. Fried stared down at the man, his voice laced with authority as he asked how Luigi dared to use violence within the walls of the academy. He declared that in the name of the Empire, he would never forgive such an act. Fried then glanced toward Levi, asking if she was all right. Still dazed by the sudden turn of events, Levi thanked him, realizing she had expected an ambush from the uncle but never imagined the second prince would show up. Fried noted he could tell she was surprised and offered a small grin, saying it had been a while since they last saw one another. The rattle of a nearby carriage announced the arrival of Isla, who rushed to Levi's side and frantically asked what had happened. She looked at her uncle being held by the prince and worried that he had tried to hurt Levi because of her. Levi reassured her friend that she was fine because the prince had helped her. Looking at the two original protagonists, Levi decided she should give the male lead his proper credit since they were meeting for the first time. Fried turned to Isla, asking if she knew the man. She confirmed he was her uncle, Luigi Reiner, and guessed he was there because of the lawsuit. Luigi began to laugh hysterically, insulting Isla's tone and asking if she was acting high and mighty like some pampered lady. He claimed she was being deceived and asked if the defective wench had talked her into claiming the inheritance. Isla's expression hardened, and the sound of her heels clacking against the stone preceded a swift movement. She delivered a thunderous slap across Luigi's face, the force of which sent him crashing to the ground with a heavy plop. Everyone was shocked into silence, the surrounding students murmuring that they should be more careful around her from now on, as she was clearly not as mild-mannered as they thought. Isla stood over the man, warning him never to disrespect her friend again. Fried ordered his men to take Luigi away to be dealt with according to official protocol. The uncle panicked, realizing that his life was ruined and he was facing life imprisonment, but as he tried to struggle, Fried summoned arcs of electricity. The magical energy manifested as glowing vines that bound and squeezed the man until he was completely restrained. With the situation handled, Fried turned toward the approaching figure of Damien Evelyn. He noted that it had been a while and called out Damien's name, his golden eyes meeting the dark, intense gaze of his brother. Damien stood before him, silent and stoic, as the surrounding air felt heavy with the weight of their unspoken rivalry. Levi watched from a distance, her heart racing as she witnessed the two princes of the Empire face one another. Fried's expression remained serene as he addressed Damien, questioning what exactly he was doing there. He noted that attacking a noble's carriage and brandishing a dagger in front of the second prince was already a serious offense, but the man on the ground had even attempted to make a run for the palace. Damien stepped forward, his gaze chillingly focused on the cowering Luigi Reiner. He looked down at the traitor and asked if the man knew that treason against the Empire's son was punishable by immediate execution. Luigi let out a desperate, strangled sound of terror as Damien's presence loomed over him. Turning back to his brother, Damien declared that since Fried had captured the traitor, he would leave the investigation in his hands. Fried offered a polite smile, acknowledging that the successful capture was all thanks to Damien's intervention. Fried then looked toward Levi and Isla, suggesting they come with him for a moment so he could question them about the incident. However, Damien reached out and commanded them to wait. He stated that the attack on the Empire's sword was a serious matter that required his personal attention. With a firm tone, he announced that he would take Lady Levi with him for questioning instead. Fried watched his brother with a piercing, analytical gaze, his golden eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before he let out a soft laugh. He conceded, telling Damien that he understood and asking him to look after the lady. Fried decided he would simply hear the rest of the story from Lady Isla and promised to see Levi later. As the guards dragged Luigi away, Levi felt a wave of panic wash over her. She reached out in her mind, begging Fried not to leave her alone with the first prince. Damien turned to her, his expression unreadable, and suggested they go talk in private for a moment. Levi let out a startled gasp but found she had no choice but to follow. A short while later, Levi sat on a plush sofa within the opulent walls of Damien's private quarters. She clutched a cup of tea, her mind racing as she wondered why he had to bring her to this specific place of all locations. She watched Damien move across the room, his heavy footsteps echoing against the floor, and she worried that he might actually remember everything that had happened between them during the demon attack. Damien noticed her silence and told her not to worry, clarifying that he had not called her there for any personal reasons. Levi plopped back against the cushions with a sigh of relief, though she still tentatively asked what exactly he needed from her. Damien hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting away as he admitted he wanted to ask about the snake on his lower body. He quickly corrected himself, calling it a dragon instead. Levi's face turned bright red as she stared at him in utter shock. Her mind spiraled as she wondered if he was actually talking about his own anatomy and where on earth his sudden confidence had come from. Damien cleared his throat with an impatient ahem, asking why she wasn't answering him. He warned her that he remembered everything, so she shouldn't try to weasel her way out of the conversation. Levi let out a nervous cough and admitted that she remembered it too, adding that it would be impossible to forget such an imposing dragon. Damien looked at her with a heavy, intense gaze and asked her to describe it for him according to her memory. He demanded to know her overall impression of it, thinking to himself that he needed to confirm whether she had actually seen the demonic mark. Levi covered her face with her hand, thinking that the man really was a hopeless, crazy pervert. She forced herself to speak, telling him that first of all, She believed he was justified in calling it a dragon due to its massive size. Damien gave a slow, thoughtful nod and agreed with her statement, which only made Levi more frustrated. She internally screamed for the crazy bastard not to agree with her. She then added that her overall impression was one of such surprise that she had been left completely speechless. Damien mused that her reaction made sense, admitting that he had been quite shocked when he saw it as well. He thought to himself that he had now confirmed Levi Heron knew about the mark. He looked down at the dark, serpentine pattern etched into his skin, wondering if she could also sense the demonic energy it was currently emitting. He realized that if she could, it would be a bit troublesome for his plans. He looked back at her and asked how she felt when she saw it. He knew that neither Douglas nor Fried had noticed anything, but he suspected the Herons possessed animalistic instincts when it came to such things. He told her he was sure she knew this already, but he confessed that it had actually felt good. Levi blinked in confusion, repeating the word, good, with a look of disbelief. She couldn't fathom how demonic energy could ever feel good, thinking it should have been entirely unpleasant. She watched his face, wondering why he was making such an intense expression. Damien's face flushed as he noted her confusion, and Levi finally snapped, asking what on earth he was talking about. She reminded him that he was the one who asked how it felt, but she countered that she had told him to describe his feelings, not to describe her own body. Damien paused, realizing the conversation was flowing in an incredibly odd direction. He stood up abruptly and told her to just take a look at the mark herself. Levi let out an embarrassed shriek as he began to unfasten his clothes, blushing furiously as she asked what he was doing. Damien gripped his shirt and pulled it aside, revealing his toned torso and the glowing purple mark of a snake coiling around his hip. Levi gasped, her eyes widening as she realized it was a literal mark on his skin. She whispered, "Good heavens," and asked what the mark was. Damien noted that this must be her first time actually seeing it. He explained that the mark had shown up on his body right after the events of that night and asked if she knew anything about it. Levi apologized, stating she had never seen such a mark before. Damien sat back down as a servant trickled more tea into his cup, and Levi realized with a flush of shame that this mark was likely why he had been saying it felt good. She wondered if it was the demon's doing since the creature's tentacles had touched him. She noted that even as the heir of House Heron, she couldn't sense any energy from the mark, and she asked if His Highness could sense it himself. Damien replied that he could feel it sometimes. When she asked what kind of energy it was, he looked at her with a smoldering intensity, telling her it was exactly the kind of energy she was imagining right now. He explained that his body would suddenly heat up and get aroused, just as it had when the demon attacked them. Levi was horrified by the revelation. Damien leaned over her, his presence overwhelming, and told her that she would have to help him remove the mark. Levi gasped, "What? Me?" in total shock. Damien asked why she wouldn't want to help, reminding her that House Heron was the imperial family's sword. He loomed closer, his shadow falling over her as he asked if she was really planning to turn a blind eye to a prince who had been attacked by a demon. Levi felt a bead of sweat roll down her temple, realizing that the situation was getting incredibly troublesome. She eventually relented, telling him that she understood and promising to keep it a secret while helping him return to normal as soon as possible. Damien watched her closely before asking if there was anything she wanted from him in return. Levi thought for a moment, recalling how many women had vied for Damien's attention in the original novel. She decided it would be best to eliminate any risk factors for her own safety and for Isla's. She looked him in the eye and told him she would prefer if neither of them got involved with anyone else until the demon's mark was gone. Damien smirked, asking if she was perhaps afraid that some jealous woman might attack her. Levi quickly protested, blushing as she claimed she was only trying to protect Isla. Damien accepted the condition, stating that he wasn't interested in romance anyway, which prompted a dry comment of, "Good for you," from Levi. With the terms settled, Damien reached into his coat and produced a piece of parchment that fluttered in the air, glowing with an ethereal light. Levi recognized it immediately as an oath magic circle and felt a sudden jolt of apprehension. A complex magical array manifested between them, and as they both touched the paper, a bright flash confirmed that the contract had been formed. Damien then dropped a final, scandalous condition, telling her that she also had to help him whenever he turned into a beast because of the surging demonic energy. Levi's heart did a frantic double thud as she realized he was asking her to sleep with him every time the curse acted up. Before she could protest, Damien closed the distance, calling out her full name as the magic hissed and faded, marking her as his partner in this secret pact. The scene shifted to the Academy Library, where Fried stood amidst towering shelves of books. His aide reached for a volume but was interrupted as Fried turned with a serious expression. He was currently interrogating Luigi Reiner, whose hands were bound as he sat in a chair, trembling with fear. Fried questioned if the reason he had attacked House Heron's carriage was truly because they had helped Lady Isla with her lawsuit. Luigi stammered a confirmation, desperately begging for forgiveness and claiming he had lost his mind for a moment. Fried stepped toward him, the sound of his boots clacking against the stone sounding like a death knell. He placed the tip of his sword against Luigi's throat, making the man let out a terrified gasp. With a frosty tone, Fried declared that forgiveness was a grace reserved for good people who made simple mistakes. He told Luigi that he had not only exploited his own niece but had also attempted to murder her friend, rendering him entirely unworthy of any mercy. The aide leaned in and whispered that someone was outside, and Fried's expression instantly softened as he realized it was Lady Levi. He ordered the guards to show her in at once. Levi stepped into the room, her heels clicking as she curtsied and offered a formal greeting. Fried asked if she had enjoyed a good talk with his brother, and Levi confirmed she had told him everything about the ambush. She noticed a flicker of intensity in Fried's eyes as she thanked him for his earlier assistance. Fried dismissed her gratitude, insisting he had merely done his duty as a knight and the imperial family's sword. He invited her to sit, and as they settled across from one another, he remarked that she must feel quite chagrined by the attack. Levi paused, admitting it was fine, though she secretly thought it would have been much easier to legally ruin the uncle if he had managed to strike her direct. Fried gave her a reassuring grin, promising that no harm would ever befall Lady Isla under his watch. Sometime later, the quiet of the Heron estate was interrupted by a gentle knock at Levi's door. A maid announced that a reply from the Count had arrived, causing Levi to perk up with excitement. She took the letter, her eyes sparkling as she realized it was a message from her father. She began to read the elegant script, which started with her father calling her his dear daughter and offering his heartfelt congratulations on her enrollment. He asked if she was enjoying her school life and noted he had heard her health was improving considerably. However, he cautioned her not to overexert herself. He lamented that he was currently on a business trip in a place where magic didn't function, realizing how sad it was not to see her or hear her voice. He mentioned it would take an entire month for the letter to even reach her and expressed his burning desire to return home so they could chat and train together. Levi was deeply touched, feeling the warmth of a true family for the first time, even compared to her past life. She giggled at how much he doted on her, especially when the letter turned into a long rant about being wary of men and scoundrels. However, her expression grew serious as she reached the final paragraph. Her father wrote that he wanted to tell her about the secret library that had been passed down only to the heirs of House Heron. Levi stared at the words, her mind racing with curiosity as she wondered what secrets could be hidden within House Heron's secret library. Without a second of delay, she called out for her loyal servant, Varan. Startled by the sudden summons, Varan rushed into the room with a swift movement, bracing himself as he asked what she required. With a look of bright determination, Levi declared that she wanted to visit the secret library immediately. They soon reached a grand fireplace, where Varan announced that they had arrived. Levi peered at the ornate structure as he explained that this hearth served as the hidden entrance to the legendary library. He detailed that an heir possessing the blessing of invitation simply had to channel their mana into the structure to activate a teleportation circle, allowing entry. He expressed his absolute confidence that the heir of House Heron would have no trouble with such a task. Levi reached out her hand, contemplating the weight of her lineage, which had endured for 660 years since the time of the founding emperor. She wondered what secrets were hidden behind such tight security. As her palm met the stone, a brilliant flash of light and a sudden rush of energy surrounded her. In an instant, she was swept away in a shimmering teleportation spell. Varan stood back, overcome with emotion as he sniffed back tears, claiming he was honored to have witnessed such a glorious moment and promising to report the events to the master in great detail. Levi offered a light-hearted laugh, telling him there was no need for tears as she gave a final nod and prepared for the journey. Shimmering light consumed her as she stepped through the portal. Blinking as her vision cleared, Levi found herself standing in a breathtaking hall filled with endless rows of ancient books. She realized she was finally inside the secret library of House Heron. She looked around the massive archives, knowing there should be plenty of information about demons stored within. Since she was already investigating the origin of Damien's mark, this provided the perfect opportunity to find answers. She set to work, pulling books from the shelves with a heavy plop as she settled into a chair to read. She eventually found an entry from Imperial Year 457 that caught her attention. It detailed how a demon had once sneaked into a prison and attempted to possess a death row inmate. The record stated that the demon was attacked exactly as it was seeping into the man's body, causing a strange mark to appear on the inmate's skin. Levi noted that the drawing in the book looked strikingly similar to the mark on Damien's body, though his seemed larger and more complex. She pondered the implication. If the process of a demon taking over a human body was interrupted and failed to complete, a mark was left behind. This meant the mark was actually a living part of the demon itself, signifying that the transcendental demon had not been completely destroyed. Gritting her teeth, she searched frantically for a solution, wondering how the mark could be removed. Flipping through the pages, she found a passage stating that when the inmate's body was bathed in diluted holy water, the ominous mark disappeared and the demon was destroyed at the same time. Levi's mind drifted into a brief, blushing daydream of Damien bathing in holy water, but she quickly shook her head to clear her thoughts, questioning what on earth she was imagining. She focused on the reality that, unlike 200 years ago when the book was written, holy water was now monopolized by the temple that Fried controlled. She worried if it was even possible to obtain it and eventually concluded that it was virtually impossible. Later, Levi sat across from Damien in a strained, awkward silence. Damien crossed his arms and explained that holy water was the exclusive property of the central temple and only 3 priests had access to it. Incidentally, all 3 of those priests held deep grievances against him, and House Heron had no connections with the temple either. Levi let out a heavy sigh, realizing this method simply wouldn't work. However, Damien looked at her with a knowing glint in his eye and suggested that hope wasn't necessarily lost. He revealed that a sacrificial hunting competition would be held during the goddess's birthday week. According to his informants, this year's first-place prize was a single bottle of holy water. Levi gasped in realization as she repeated the words, hunting competition. Damien stated they would have to aim for victory and asked if she had a plan. He noted that while the 2 princes had the greatest advantage due to their advanced martial skills, the competition took place outdoors and required teams of 2, creating many unpredictable variables. Levi felt a metaphorical arrow stab her as she reflected on her reputation as the defective heron and the weakest in the academy. Thinking quickly, she suggested that Damien team up with his brother, the second prince. Damien flinches at the suggestion, asking if she was joking about him working with Fry. He explained that while winning would be easy with his brother, he would never be able to explain to Fried why he needed the holy water, and he feared the questions that would follow. Levi gave a mischievous grin and told him that neither of them should win. She declared with absolute confidence that she was going to be the one to take first place. Damien stared at her, asking if she was serious given her pathetic stamina. Levi let out a haughty laugh and told him to hear her out because she had a specific plan. After she finished explaining, Damien admitted that it certainly wasn't a bad plan. However, he questioned if it was truly okay for her to sabotage Fried to stop him from winning, doubting her feelings for the other prince would allow it. Levi shrugged it off with a casual smile, telling him it was fine. She reminded him that she had made an oath to help him first, declaring that he was more important to her than anyone else. She secretly thought that this was the best way to be free of this annoying business as soon as possible. As she spoke, a sudden flutter stirred in Damien's chest. His heart began to pound with a heavy thud as he watched her, questioning the strange sensation that was currently overwhelming him. Heavy footsteps echoed through the grand, sunlit corridors of the palace as Douglas, the personal guard to the first prince, walked with a troubled expression. He folded his arms and rested a hand against his chin, his mind heavy with the realization that things had taken a turn for the worse. He looked toward the floor, silently lamenting that his master, Lord Damien, had changed. Standing tall in his dark military uniform adorned with gold ropes, Douglas reflected on the prince's difficult past. Damien had survived a precarious upbringing without a single faction to support him, and to endure that cutthroat power struggle, he had obsessively pursued perfection. The guard recalled how the prince's nerves had always been on edge, but lately, he seemed to be acting like a man possessed. Douglas pictured his master back in his office, sitting dazed and distracted over piles of paperwork, looking completely lovesick while he should have been working. Groaning under his breath, Douglas worried that a screw had finally come loose in the prince's head, wondering if Damien was struggling that much with his new life at the academy. Reaching the ornate double doors of the prince's private quarters, Douglas knocked twice. He swung the door open and announced his arrival, intending to report on the antique market Damien had mentioned previously. However, the words died in his throat as he froze in the doorway. Damien stood flustered, stuttering out his guard's name in surprise, while Levi Heron sat calmly across from him. Douglas's eyes widened as he processed the scene, realizing the prince was alone in a room with a woman. As Damien turned away, his face flushed with a nervous sweat, Douglas stared at him with a mix of disbelief and amusement. He wondered what was behind that ridiculous, lovesick expression, especially since it was directed at Lady Heron, a woman everyone knew had a crush on the second prince, Lord Fry. Douglas gave a polite bow to the lady, but inwardly, he couldn't help but grin. He realized what was happening and felt a giggle bubbling up. Sensing the awkwardness, Damien cleared his throat and stood up abruptly. He told Levi that he would see her at the upcoming tournament, and she offered a graceful confirmation. As Damien began to walk toward the exit, Douglas lingered behind with a mischievous smile. He looked at Levi and asked if she was leaving already, blushing as he spoke. Levi confirmed she was, but Douglas waved his hands enthusiastically, telling her not to leave on his account and urging her to stay a bit longer. He even invited her to visit again whenever she liked. Levi looked confused but agreed to the invitation as she walked away. In the background, Damien's brow furrowed in a deep frown. As they prepared to depart, Douglas looked back at his master and gave him a confident wink and a thumbs up, whispering that he had the prince's back. Damien simply stared at his guard's antics, wondering what on earth Douglas was doing. Later, as the fireplace crackled in the prince's office, Damien regained his composure and ordered Douglas to continue the report he had started early. Douglas explained that he had gone to the antique market to search for the pendant Damien wanted, but it was taking longer than expected. When the prince asked why, Douglas explained that he was checking every single shop, but the merchants were constantly changing their inventories several times a day to prepare for the goddess's birthday festival. Damien's eyes sharpened with intensity as he commanded Douglas to find it as quickly as possible, stating that it was absolutely essential he get his hands on that pendant. Douglas nodded in understanding, but his mind raced with a theory. He leaned in with a knowing smirk, suggesting that the pendant was intended to be a gift and praising the prince for having an eye for such things. Damien snapped back, asking what he was talking about, but Douglas continued, noting that it was the perfect design to give to a member of the opposite sex. Frustrated and blushing, Damien shouted that there was no way he would ever give the goddess's relic to someone else. He looked away, muttering that Douglas was completely misunderstanding the situation and asserting that he had no intention of getting distracted by anything until he successfully became the emperor. Douglas, however, pretended to be moved to tears by the sentiment. He teased the prince for being a romantic, noting how sweet it was to call the gift a goddess's relic. Damien yelled at his guard to listen to him, his face turning red with embarrassment. Douglas looked toward the window, imagining the shimmering pink gem of the pendant. He thought to himself that if he were a woman, he would be absolutely smitten if he received such a beautiful pendant. A few days passed, and the scene shifted to a beautiful, clear morning where white birds fluttered over the city. Isla Reiner stood before a massive, elegant manor, her eyes wide with awe. Levi stood beside her, asking what she thought and if she liked the place. Isla turned to her with a radiant smile and confirmed that she loved it, marveling at the fact that it was the first time she had ever had a house in her own name. Following the successful lawsuit against the bank, Isla had managed to recover the entire inheritance her uncle had tried to steal from her. The wealth was staggering, worth 50 times the Heron family's annual income. Levi felt a small pang of jealousy at the sheer scale of merchant wealth, letting out a soft sigh. She reached out and gently patted Isla's head, telling her that she had worked incredibly hard and expressing how glad she was that Isla was finally independent of her uncle. Isla's eyes grew teary as she leaned into the touch. She whispered that it was all thanks to Levi, though she admitted she felt a bit sad about having to leave the Heron estate. Levi hummed thoughtfully, suggesting that since it would take time to clean up the manor and hire new staff, Isla should stay at the Heron house for another month. Isla's face lit up with joy, and she began to jump and wag her imaginary tail with excitement, asking if she really could stay longer. Levi laughed, advising her that it was better to make slow progress than to rush and mess things up. Grasping Levi's hands, Isla gave them a firm squeeze and made a bold proposal. She looked her friend in the eye and suggested they go on a date that very day. Levi blinked in surprise, repeating the word date as if she hadn't heard it correctly. Soon, they were seated at an exquisite restaurant. Levi looked around at the luxurious spread of food, wondering how Isla had found such a place. Isla beamed, stating that fulfilling Levi's wishes was her priority. As Levi began to eat, she worried aloud if Isla was spending too much money, but the thought was quickly replaced by how delicious the food was. She realized they were all of her favorite dishes. Isla watched her with a smile, asking how it tasted, and Levi happily confirmed it was wonderful. After their meal, they visited a high-end boutique. Isla excitedly pulled a curtain back and told Levi to try something on. Levi agreed tentatively, and after a moment of rustling fabric, she stepped out from behind the curtain. She asked Isla how she looked, appearing absolutely stunning in a shimmering, voluminous white gown that glowed with a magical light. Isla stared at her, completely mesmerized. Without taking her eyes off Levi, she gestured to the shop staff and declared that she would take the entire section of custom-made clothes, all the dresses, and every single accessory. Levi gasped in shock, trying to stop her, but Isla continued, adding all the handbags to the order as well. Levi jumped with alarm, begging Isla to wait and pointing out that she had already given her plenty of gifts. Isla paused, her expression becoming serious and intense. She looked at Levi and stated that it was still not enough to express her true feelings. Taking a step toward her friend, Isla vowed that from now on, she would make sure Levi was covered in nothing but her gifts from head to toe. She finished by softly speaking Levi's name, her eyes filled with a new, determined light. A cold shiver ran down Levi's spine as she wondered why this intense behavior felt so strangely familiar, though she offered a polite but strained confirmation to the girl. Levi's attention was suddenly caught by something in a nearby display. She let out a small gasp of surprise as her eyes landed on a specific item. Her gaze lingered on a poster for a special auction being held for the goddess's birthday week festival. She realized they were holding the event again this year and noted that she actually needed to buy some things for the upcoming hunting competition anyway. More importantly, she knew this specific auction house held something truly special. A vision of a powerful man bound in heavy chains flickered through her mind. Isla broke her train of thought, calling out to ask what she was doing over there. Levi flinched, quickly hiding the flyer she had taken. She claimed that nothing was wrong and that she simply thought a particular pendant in the window looked pretty. The two of them leaned in together to inspect a necklace featuring a large, glowing pink stone. Isla agreed that it was indeed beautiful, while Levi murmured about the brilliance of the pink gemstone. Isla looked at the stone and then back at her friend, realizing that the shimmering jewel was exactly the same shade as Levi's eyes. That night, within the quiet halls of the Heron estate, Varan approached Levi to inform her that the carriage had arrived. Dressed in sturdy traveling clothes and a heavy dark cloak, Levi confirmed she was all ready to go. When Varan asked about Isla's whereabouts, Levi explained that the girl must have been exhausted because she fell asleep right after dinner. Varan looked at his lady with an expression of deep concern, questioning if she was sure about this plan. He warned her that going to the black market alone at such a late hour could be incredibly dangerous and suggested sending the servants in her stead. Levi offered a reassuring smile, explaining that she wanted to see the items for the hunting competition in person. She took Varan's hands and gave them a gentle shake, telling him not to worry because she would not be late, and urged him to keep her outing a secret from Isla. The carriage rattled through the dark, narrow streets of the city until it came to a halt. The driver announced their arrival, and Levi stepped out into the cool night air. She looked around the shadows of the alleyway, realizing she had finally reached the infamous black market. She dismissed the driver, stating she would go alone from there, and began to navigate the labyrinthine paths. Consulting a small map, she murmured to herself, trying to remember if the entrance was in a certain direction. Her progress was interrupted when two shady figures emerged from the gloom. One of them laughed and asked what could possibly bring such a fine lady all the way out here. Levi let out a tired sigh, immediately identifying the man as a common thug targeting women's purses. The man moved closer, suggesting that a place like this was too dangerous for a frail young woman to wander alone. He grinned broadly, offering his humble services as an escort. Levi didn't miss a beat as she rejected him, stating she had no need for his help because she knew exactly how to handle a sword. Her eyes glowed with a lethal intensity as she loomed over the smaller man. With a swift movement, she partially drew a shimmering blade from her hip, releasing a burst of sharp mana. The thugs shrieked in terror, stammering out apologies before scrambling away into the darkness, promising to leave her alone. Levi watched them go with a neutral expression, but as she turned back to her path, a sudden image of Damien flashed through her mind. She thought of his dark hair and the way he spoke her name, causing a deep blush to creep across her face. She cursed under her breath, thinking she must be losing her mind because of the influence of that demon. She pulled her hood tighter, wondering why she kept thinking about the prince at such random times. Even as she tried to shake the feeling, she had to admit to herself that his face was exactly her type. She pushed through the bustling crowds of the market, searching through various stalls. She picked up a small bag of supplies, noting that she had finally found one of the items she wanted. With her primary goal met, she turned her sights toward the secret auction house. She navigated toward a building with exceptionally tight security, where a large guard eventually blocked her path. He asked what business she had there, and Levi met his gaze steadily. She delivered the required code, stating she was looking for golden horseshoes that would suit a fine steed with a white mane. The guard stepped aside and told her to go on in, though he added a mocking warning not to come running out halfway through just because she got scared. Levi ignored the comment and stepped through the glowing threshold. She entered a grand, dimly lit hall filled with masked figures and wondered if the proceedings had already started. On a raised stage, an auctioneer spoke with practiced energy, thanking the distinguished guests for their patience and offering his sincere gratitude for their presence. He announced that it was time for the rare specimen everyone had been waiting for. The sound of heavy metal clanking echoed through the room as something was dragged onto the stage. The auctioneer described the captive as a male with charming gray fur and invited the crowd to look as he slid a silk cloth away. Levi stared as a young man with messy silver gray hair was revealed, kneeling on the floor in heavy manacles. The auctioneer proclaimed that this was the combat slave known as Gray, describing him as perfect for use as a hunting dog and ideal as a plaything for nighttime pleasures. Levi's eyes narrowed into a sharp frown, realizing the situation was unfolding right on cue. She looked at the chained man, recognizing the one known as the Mad Dog of Evelyn, Ares Knez. In the original story, he was saved by the second prince, Fried, and went on to become his loyal dog and a major supporting character. However, Levi knew the truth that others did not. Ares was actually the lost descendant of the ducal house of Knez. Currently, he lived without any knowledge of his true identity, following only his master's orders until he eventually met a miserable end at Damien's hands. Levi recalled how at the very moment his life ended, he miraculously regained his memories and sanity, only to die wondering why he had only remembered everything then. To her, he was one of the most tragic characters in the entire narrative. On the auction stage, Ares let out a low, guttural growl and lunged forward with a desperate cry. The handlers immediately yanked back on his heavy chains, which clashed and clattered with a violent sound as they forced him back. Ares groaned in pain as he was slammed down, hitting the floor with a heavy impact. The guards pressed him into the wood, shouting for someone to hurry. A man stepped forward and jabbed a needle into the captive's shoulder, delivering a sedative. Ares gasped, his eyes wide as he felt the drug take hold, while his body slumped back into a state of forced submission. In the audience, the masked nobles began to murmur in shock and disgust. They questioned if the man was sick and scowled as the auctioneer cleared his throat, beginning the bidding at a single gold coin. The auctioneer tried to pitch him as a rare opportunity to own a hunting dog with excellent combat efficiency, but a man in the crowd scoffed, muttering that he looked more like a rabid dog. Others joined in, asking if the auction house took them for fools and accusing them of trying to sell a sick, useless piece of filth. They whispered that no one would want to be cursed by owning such a thing, even suggesting that he should just be thrown into a pig pen. Ares lay panting on the floor, sweat and saliva dripping from his face as he endured their insults. Suddenly, a clear voice cut through the noise, telling them all to wait. Levi stepped forward, the fabric of her cloak rustling as she announced that she would like to place a bid. A smirk played on her lips as the surrounding nobles wondered who she was and why on earth she wanted to buy that thing. The auctioneer looked up in surprise as the hooded girl confirmed her offer of 4 gold. The captive faltered for a moment, looking up as the auctioneer excitedly announced that the bidding would indeed start at 4 gold. After the auction concluded, the scene shifted to the back of the facility where the transaction was being finalized. A handler asked where they should deliver the purchase, and Levi informed him that she had a carriage, so bringing him to the square would be sufficient. The handler looked at the bag of gold in his hand, wondering if 4 gold was really alright since it seemed a bit high for a slave in that condition. However, he quickly snatched the bag away, thinking to himself that you could buy a healthy slave for 1 gold and labeling Levi a sucker. He called out to his partners to pull the cart, leaving Levi alone with her new acquisition. Levi watched them go, thinking that the man was wrong. She was actually going to say the price was far too cheap, considering she had just acquired the future lord of a ducal house for a mere 4 gold. She knew her reasons for bidding on Ares went beyond simply making an ally out of Fried's future confidant. She wanted to free this broken man from his suffering, return him safely to House Knez, and receive their eternal gratitude. She felt pleased with herself, knowing she needed to lay the groundwork to prevent the original storyline from happening so she could live happily. Inside the carriage, Ares began to struggle and squirm in his sleep, let out a pained growl. Levi reached out and gently stroked his silver hair, whispering for him to be quiet and calling him a good boy. She looked at him with compassion, acknowledging that while things were hard now, he would be okay soon. She continued to pat and stroke his head, promising that she would not sell him off or do anything bad to him, urging him not to worry. As she looked closer, she noted that beneath the bruises and swelling, he was actually quite handsome. Later, at a secure location, Levi ordered Varan to call a trustworthy physician to look after the guest. She instructed that Ares be well fed and insisted that the matter be kept completely confidential. Varan let out a heavy sigh but gave his word that he would make sure everyone kept quiet about it. Levi began to wipe Ares' scarred and bruised torso with a damp cloth, noting that since he was mentally unstable, they would need to keep him restrained for the time being. She told Varan to report to her as soon as the man's condition improved, and the head servant bowed, confirming his orders. Ares' eyes suddenly fluttered, and he blinked as he regained consciousness. Levi leaned over him with a warm smile, asking if he was awake. Ares let out a sharp gasp and jolted in surprise, his chains rattling. Levi reached out to pat his head again, asking if she had startled him. She admitted that his current situation might be a bit uncomfortable, but explained that she was going to keep him confined to this room for a while. She told him she had heard he was quite skilled in combat and expressed her worry that he might suddenly lash out. Ares watched her, mesmerized, as she offered a soft smile. Levi looked at him and thought about how in the original story, Ares had been much more mentally sound than this. She resolved to find a way to improve his mental state and promised herself that someday, she would find a way to restore his lost memories as well. She gave him one final, gentle pat and told Ares to sleep well. Morning of the goddess's birthday festival arrived with an energetic atmosphere as the academy grounds filled with the bustle and scurry of students and staff preparing for the grand event. Amidst the morning light, Isla walked toward her friend with a bright expression, telling Levi that she looked absolutely beautiful today. Levi stood tall in her new hunting uniform, a sophisticated ensemble of shimmering white and gold fabric that accentuated her poise. She had styled her long blonde hair into a complex, elegant braid that trailed down her back. Adjusting the sword at her hip, Levi admitted with a hint of an awkward smile that she thought she might have gone overboard for a mere hunting competition. Isla immediately dismissed the concern, wagging her imaginary tail with excitement as she told Levi that she looked perfect. However, her expression shifted into a protective scowl, muttering that she was worried unworthy men might give Levi lecherous looks. Her intense aura was so palpable that the passing male students flinched in fear, while Levi could only offer a flustered sigh at her friend's overprotectiveness. Levi tried to reassure her, noting that everyone would be far too busy hunting to stare, and reminded Isla that there would be plenty of people coming to cheer, just like her. Isla began to rummage through the basket she carried, mentioning that she had something for her. With a soft click of a small velvet box, Isla presented a stunning pendant and asked Levi if she would accept it. Levi's eyes widened in recognition, realizing this was the very item she had been looking at earlier. Isla explained that she had noticed Levi eyeing it at the antique shop last time, so she had decided to buy it. Levi felt a wave of guilt, clarifying that she had actually been looking at the auction flyer posted nearby, not the pendant itself. Isla gasped in surprise but quickly moved behind her friend, asking to put it on her. As the silver-haired girl fastened the necklace, the shimmering pink gemstone rested perfectly against Levi's chest. Isla smiled warmly, noting how glad she was that the color matched Levi's eyes perfectly. Levi looked down at the beautiful jewel, thanking Isla and asking if it hadn't been incredibly expensive. Isla shook her head, explaining that price didn't matter because she felt a mysterious, good energy coming from the stone and truly wanted her to have it. Though it was hard to explain exactly why, Isla tapped the gem and promised that the necklace would guide Levi in a good direction. With a radiant smile, she offered a final blessing, wishing that the goddess would be with her. Meanwhile, a heavy carriage clattered and rattled across the cobblestones as it approached the festival grounds. Inside, Damien sat alone, gripping his face in frustration as he let out a pained groan. The demonic mark on his skin was throbbing with a violent intensity, causing him to curse under his breath. He wondered if he would eventually have to resort to cutting the mark from his very flesh, confused as to why it was flaring up again after being calm for so long. The carriage came to a halt with a heavy thud, and the door swung open to reveal the second prince, Fried. Noticing his brother's state, Fried tilted his head and asked if Damien was all right. Damien quickly composed himself, lying that he was fine and claiming he simply thought he saw dark clouds gathering in the sky. Fried agreed, noting that they couldn't let rain ruin the hunting competition. He reminded Damien that they were attending as a single team this year and expressed his desire for them to do their best together. Fried offered a gentle, serene smile, but Damien's mind was racing with suspicion. He knew this behavior wasn't like his brother at all. Fried had been the one to propose they enter the competition as a team, and he had deliberately leaked the news to the press to ensure Damien couldn't refuse the offer without causing a scandal. Damien stared at the blonde prince, wondering what kind of scheme his brother was plotting now, noting that lately, Fried had been doing things he never used to do. Fried caught his brother's gaze and wondered why Damien was acting so strangely all of a sudden. Outside, as the contestants gathered, Levi took a moment to stretch her limbs, her movements fluid and confident. Damien happened to glance in her direction and froze, his eyes locking onto the pendant around her neck. He stared in absolute shock, his thoughts racing as he recognized the item. He couldn't understand how Levi Heron could have possibly obtained the goddess's sacred relic. The ceremony officially began as white birds fluttered over the crowd. A high priestess stood before the gathered nobles, declaring that all who had come with devout hearts to offer sacrifices would now receive the blessings of the goddess. Fried, Damien, and the other participants bowed their heads and clasped their hands in prayer as a holy light washed over them. A priest stepped forward with a lit torch, announcing the commencement of the event. With a roar of flames, the hunting competition officially began. The contestants charged into the dense forest, their movements creating a loud whoosh as they disappeared among the trees. Levi ran into the woods but eventually staggered to a halt, hesitating as she looked around. A voice called out behind her, asking if the future sword of the Empire was already tired. Levi turned to see Ivan Kald, the heir to House Kald and the man known as the Empire's Shield. He noted that he thought she had already gone ahead, scoffing that teammates were supposed to stay together no matter what. Levi looked at him with a calm smile, though internally she was grumbling. She recalled the simple reason she had ended up on a team with this annoying brat. During the team announcements, the crowd had been in a clamor, gossiping about the two princes joining forces while noting that Lady Heron's teammate spot was still vacant. Ivan had laughed at the roster, mocking that whoever ended up on her team was going to be miserable. He had stated that participating with a defect like her would result in coming in last place and getting humiliating photos plastered all over the papers. He had even joked that her partner would be lucky if they weren't chased by wild boars. Despite his insults, Levi had approached him with a smile, surprising him by revealing that she had been planning to team up with him all along. She had grabbed his arm, much to his annoyance, and declared that the Empire's sword and shield were a perfect match. She didn't consider it revenge. She simply wanted to mess with him a little. Now, as they strode through the sun-dappled forest, Levi hummed a cheerful tune, curious to see just how amazing the abilities of the so-called shield of the Empire truly were. She looked at Ivan and challenged him to show her his skills. The leaves swished gently in the breeze as Levi Heron and Ivan Kald made their way through the underbrush. Stepping carefully over tangled roots, Levi reached into her pouch and extended her hand, telling Lord Kald to take the small object she held. Ivan looked down at the tiny glass vial resting in his gloved palm, asking with a hint of confusion what the item was. Levi explained that it was a lucky charm meant to lure in prey, adding with a self-deprecating sigh that it was sad enough he was partnered with someone as incompetent as her, but it would be even sadder if they didn't run into any prey at all. She looked down at the pink pendant around her neck, her thoughts unreadable. Ivan scowled, wondering if it wouldn't be a problem if they ran into too many monsters, and mockingly questioned if she even had the stamina to handle them all. Levi met his gaze, stating simply that she should at least try to handle them. A playful smirk crossed her face as she made a swishing gesture, suggesting that they make a bet. She proposed that if their team won and secured the prize, whoever took down more prey would keep the entire reward for themselves. She looked at him with a challenging glint in her eyes, asking if the heir to House Kald felt confident enough to accept. Ivan clenched the hilt of his sword, his expression hardening as he agreed to the wager, dismissing it as just a simple bet. As they continued their stride, Ivan looked at the vial in his hand, cursing under his breath. He couldn't believe he was actually relying on such a superstition, and felt pathetic for doing so. He glanced back at Levi, who was following behind with a cheerful expression, and thought to himself that a defective product who couldn't even catch a single baby boar had some nerve daring to propose a bet to him. Suddenly, the bushes rustled violently as a glint of red eyes appeared in the shadows. With a powerful whoosh, several massive boars dashed out of the thicket. Ivan immediately drew his blade with a sharp metallic clack, swearing on his honor as a knight that he would crush his enemies mercilessly. He looked over his shoulder at Levi and told her to just watch from behind him. As he braced for the charge, a memory of his grandfather flashed through his mind, reminding him that the duty of the shield of the Empire was not to cut down the enemy, but to block and endure while protecting the members of House Heron. Ivan gritted his teeth, thinking that his grandfather was wrong. He believed that rule only applied when the Herons were proper swords themselves. He intended to prove that there were exceptions to his family's destiny, and with a swift movement, he began to slash and slice through the charging beasts. Levi stood back, watching the scene with a calm expression while the ground thudded under the weight of the monsters. Ivan managed to take down a few, but his triumph was short-lived. A low rumble echoed through the trees as even more boars began to emerge from the darkness. Ivan's eyes widened in shock, stammering out a question as to where all of them had come from. The boars snorted and growled, surrounding the young knight. Panicked, Ivan shouted for the beasts to get away as the situation devolved into a chaotic crash. Levi watched him struggle, noting with a tilt of her head that boars have incredibly strong protective instincts for their young, and Ivan had killed the first few without a single thought. She acknowledged that the overwhelming number of prey was actually thanks to her charm. The item was known as the fairy's tear, which in the original novel was a substance called crystallized tree sap that the heroine Isla had used to catch boars attacking a village. At this point in history, its properties were officially unknown, and it was illegally traded on the black market as mere decoration. However, the truth was that the crystal had a potent effect for luring boars, and when crushed into a fine powder and placed near the ground, the scent was intensified. Just as the scent wafted through the air, Ivan realized he was in deep trouble. He cursed again, frustrated that this was happening while Levi Heron was watching him. Despite his desperation, he shouted at her not to interfere, stubbornly claiming that the prey was his alone. Levi watched him with a bored expression, muttering that he could do whatever he wanted. She noted that if he was going to act that stubborn even when he was about to be trampled to death, he must have a trick up his sleeve. The boars dashed forward, and the sound of the impact was a heavy whack. Ivan groaned in pain as his sword was knocked from his hand, clattering onto the grass several feet away. He realized with horror that he was now defenseless. Levi observed the shift in his stance and the flow of his mana the moment he lost his weapon, recognizing the distinct defensive swordsmanship of House Cal. Ivan lay on the ground, gasping for air as the massive leader of the boar pack lunged toward him. Levi finally let out a long sigh, realizing that if she kept standing back and watching, the boy might actually die. She spoke up, telling him she couldn't let him be the first fatality in the hunting competition and get all the attention. With a fluid motion, she manifested her mana, and several shimmering, translucent daggers began to float in the air around her. A single blade swished through the air, piercing the lead boar and causing it to tumble into the dirt. Levi looked down at the shocked knight and asked if he finally wanted some help, calling him by his title, Lord Cal. She watched the boar growl with glowing red eyes, her thoughts drifting to the man she was about to save. She admitted to herself that while she wished she could just let him get fatally wounded, she could not ignore the fact that Ivan had worked a lot harder than she ever had. She acknowledged that she had only gotten by as a knight thanks to her inherited blessings and raw talent, making it only fair for him to criticize her lack of formal training. With a powerful motion, she sent the blades flying forward. The mana weapons shined with a brilliant light as they sliced through the air, finding their mark with a lethal strike. Ivan watched in stunned silence as the lead boar was taken down in an instant, its body hitting the forest floor with a heavy thud. Levi strolled toward him with a playful smirk, thinking to herself that this time, she would have to settle for simply enjoying the dumbstruck expression on his face. She stopped before him and asked if he was hurt, noting the dark blood staining the sleeve of his uniform. Ivan tried to brush it off, muttering that it was nothing, but Levi did not listen. She told him it clearly was not nothing because he was bleeding, and before he could protest, she grabbed his arm firmly. Ivan gasped, asking what she was doing, but she told him to simply hold still. She popped the cap off a small glass vial and poured the glowing liquid over his arm, ignoring his sharp groan of pain. With a determined look, she used her teeth to rip a strip of clean fabric from her own garment. As she carefully wrapped his wound, she remarked that the injury was not deep and the bleeding should stop soon, adding that the defensive techniques of House Cald really were impressive. Ivan scowled at her, asking if she was mocking him for being a knight who only relied on defense, but Levi laughed, telling him he was incredibly twisted. She assured him she never thought anything of the sort, explaining that it was only thanks to his self-sacrificing defense that their hunt had been such a success. She looked him in the eye and suggested he have some pride in his skills, since he had earned them through honest hard work. As she finished the bandage with a gentle pat, she told him she was not just being nice and thought his display was really cool, reminding him that everyone had their own strengths. Levi stood up and announced that it was time to move on to the next prey, but Ivan remained on the ground, his face completely flushed a deep shade of red. Levi blinked in confusion, asking if he had a fever or why his face was so red. The scene shifted to the end of the day as the sun began to set over the festival grounds. Heavy wooden carts rattled and clattered as they were pulled back toward the center of the academy. Damien and Fried stood together near the scoreboard, looking frustrated as they noted that a lot of people seemed to have made it to the end without ever seeing their prey, including themselves. Fried offered a strained smile, admitting it was true and expressing his disappointment since he had hoped for a good result while teamed up with his brother. Damien looked at the second prince with a sharp gaze, suspecting that Fried never had any intention of focusing on the competition at all. He wondered what on earth his brother was thinking, recalling how he felt Fried had been deliberately interfering with his hunt earlier. Suddenly, a murmur rippled through the crowd as a cart clunked to a stop nearby. The students gasped, wondering what that was and what kind of superhuman team could have hunted so many beasts. The cart was stacked high with the massive bodies of several boars, leaving everyone dumbstruck. One student remarked that he thought they just had bad luck today, but realized that cart held all the available prey in the forest. They whispered among themselves, asking who owned the cart and what team they were from. The announcer's voice boomed over the field, declaring that the winning team of the day was Levi Heron and Ivan Cal. A massive cheer erupted from the spectators while the surrounding nobles whispered in disbelief, wondering how the winning team could possibly be those two. They asked if the count was right, but the officials confirmed it, stating they had caught twice as much game as the second-place team, Prince Fried. Some accused them of cheating, claiming it was impossible, but the judges stated they had investigated thoroughly and found no evidence of foul play. Levi stood triumphantly on the stage, waving her hand to the crowd. A priest approached her, calling her name and informing her that the commemorative medals and the special prizes prepared by the temple would be presented at the upcoming royal ball. Levi offered her thanks as the crowd continued to clap and cheer. From the sidelines, Damien and Fried watched the ceremony with grim expressions. Damien's eyes were fixed on the shimmering pink gemstone hanging from Levi's neck. He swallowed nervously, his fist clenching at his side as he watched the girl celebrate her victory. Beside him, Fried watched the scene with a cold, calculating grin, letting out a quiet sound of intrigue as he observed the woman who had just defied everyone's expectations.